I gotta embrace the marble. I gotta sniff the marble. I gotta lick the marble. I gotta wash the marble. I gotta date the marble. I gotta be the marble. Why am I making that SpongeBob reference of all things? Well, I'll tell you why. Actually, no, I can't tell you why, because I don't know why. It's just something that came to me while I was eating earlier, and I was like, you know what? Maybe that's what I should do for the intro. Hi, Aiden. I mean, hey, it makes just as much sense as, I don't know, anything else, I guess. Am I right? Am I right? I don't know if I'm right. I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't pretend to know, like, half of the things that I pretend to know, I guess. But, I mean, you know. Okay, you'll have to forgive me a little bit because I am moving some sticky notes around here. They are kind of out of position. Yeah, sorry, this is taking a little bit because all of these are just so out of order that's like... Ugh. You love this intro song? I do too. I love Hyrule Warriors. I mean, I love Hyrule Warriors in general, but Age of Calamity is something else. If you've not played Age of Calamity, you totally should. It is very good, actually. I mean, it kind of plays differently from like the last Hyrule Warriors game, or like the one that came before it. Like, personally, some of the mob mechanics I don't know if were changed for the better, but a lot of the gameplay changes are definitely good changes. But like the soundtrack and story are actually some of my favorite parts of it, which is crazy to me. I actually enjoyed the story in Age of Calamity more than Breath of the Wild itself. That's, when does that happen? Like, a Musou game having a more engaging story, well, having an even more engaging story than its actual main series predecessor. You know? Like, how does that even happen? Like, honestly, how does that even happen? I mean, they did a very good job. They did a fantastic job. Maybe I should play it on stream sometime, because I am actually long overdue for playing it. Okay, I think all the sticky notes are in order now, which is good. Alright, well, how are you doing, Aiden? I'm glad to see you arrive today for the finale of Maze Crush Final Frontier. Finally, at least hopefully the remaining questions will be answered, because yes, there are actually still some lingering questions and untied loose ends that need to be wrapped up. Which this next chapter is primarily going to concern itself with. But there's also some conflict of sorts that comes apparent in the final chapter. And the way that plays out may surprise you a bit. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. TBH. Because you know what I need to do? I need to get the sources ready Okay, there's the Storytime group. Title. Gotta include the fireplace, too. You cannot forget that. Alright, I think we're ready. Also, I gotta hide the archipelago client because I'm not doing archipelago today. Alright. Oh, right. I also gotta set up the title too, shouldn't I? Gosh dang it. Well, not the title, but the chapter. Alright. Now we're good. And here we are. Here we are. It is time. It is finally time. You know what that means. Fish. Well, I gotta stop the music. But you know, honestly, I'm not sure how to stall this. To be quite honest with you. Like, I feel like I need to, like, ease everyone in to this a little bit and be like, hey, this is kind of big. It is the conclusion to a story that has been, you know, quite fundamental in my aspirations as a writer, you know? I should give it like a swan song treatment, but I'm not sure how to do that. Like, I feel like I've done it better with the other ones, but now I'm just like, there's gonna be like, well, I'm just gonna be plopping you in there. I don't want to, but I don't just want to do that. I want to. I don't know, man. Maybe I'm just thinking about it a little bit too much. But I don't know. I don't know. Maybe we could save the thoughts until after. I don't know. Maybe that's just when it'll be especially forthcoming. But right now, it feels like I feel like I'm like in the throes of like right before something ends. You know, where I don't want it to end. So you know, I kind of trying to prolong the inevitable as long as possible. You don't have a creative bone in your body, so you don't know how to help me there, unfortunately. I mean that is fair. That is fair. But I don't know. This is more of a sentimental thing than a creative thing, honestly. It just feels like, you know, it is close to the end, and I need to resist with every fiber of my being to prolonging the inevitable, but at the same time, it's like, I want it to last. I want it to last, you know? Not wanting to end. Oh, I'm glad I'm not the only one feeling that at the moment. But all good things must come to an end, and wow, absolutely nothing different with this one. So let's get started, shall we? Let us get started. The finale of Maze Crush Final Frontier by PikamasterADV, with the denouement written by me. Chapter 41, To Pick a Brain. Get it? Because, well, actually, you're not going to get this. You're not going to get this until later anyway. You'll get this at the end. Maybe. By the end. We'll see. It didn't take long for all that happened after meeting up with everyone after the final battle to become a blur for May. Or, at least relatively speaking, for something that should have been one of the defining events of her life. After all the life and death struggles and the resulting adrenaline rush wearing off, knowing the danger had passed, she became just so sleepy. Just the sight of a dark corner of the room gave her the near insatiable desire to crawl over and take a nap. Still, there was no rest for the weary, as the group reasoned that it would likely be best if they kept their undivided eye on Evergreen's actions, or rather, Giovanni's, as May had confirmed after all, while they waited for help to arrive. Actually, calling for help was an ordeal in and of itself. Very few usable means of communication even existed in the facility, despite how high-tech its infrastructure suggested. All outbound lines stayed solely within the network, so regular contact with police or anyone in the outside world really was impossible. In the end, Greta suggests they settle for using one of the brain's comm devices and tune it to a more open channel, after explicitly unblocking Scott's signal, that is. Never much of a mind for technology, May went ahead and left her to fiddle with it while she and the others considered what to do about transportation. Jesse, James, and Meowth went outside to check on the Wobbuffet balloon they'd all left before entering the facility. After a few minutes, they returned with empty palms and exasperated faces. Someone, likely one of Giovanni's henchmen, had made off with or simply destroyed the right out of there. And with that balloon being their last spare, it was clear they were all stranded until they managed to contact someone. It was probably for the best, May thought to herself. Considering how tightly packed that basket was for the storming party alone, there was no way they managed to fit Ash and the bound and gagged Giovanni, Brandon, Tucker, Lucy, Cassidy, and Butch as passengers in the basket. And that was without even mentioning the possibility that it wouldn't have supported everyone's combined weight to begin with. But for her personally, the less she's thought about having to spend yet another few hours standing in an awkward position that cramped her knees, the better. With nothing much to do besides keep an eye on their captive, everyone gave up thinking of a way off the island in the meantime. Plus, it was a good opportunity for them to lick their wounds from the past hour, chew the fat, and just kill time while Greta and Annabelle fiddled with their comm devices. The next few minutes was quite banal. People talking about this and that, glancing to the side as if to make sure that Giovanni hadn't broken out of his bindings and snuck out under their noses, and taking time to investigate the unconscious Ho-Oh up close. At least until May figured that it would have been safer just to find whatever Pokeball it had been captured with and call it, just in case it woke up. She didn't have to search far, as an unusual yellow and black ball was the only thing even on Giovanni's person, and testing to make sure it was the right one was a trivial matter. Before long, the giant bird was gone, and the others could turn back to their conversations as though nothing was even there. It also wasn't long before Greta suddenly started hopping for joy and celebrating. Yes! I got a hold of Scott! Like Carvana having caught a whiff of blood in the water, everyone immediately swarmed together and looked at her expectantly. A few even clambered to talk into her mic in the hopes of their voices somehow being able to breach the opaque barrier that was called the mute button. Annoyed and clutching her ear to block the excess noise, she shooed away the others and continued speaking to the other interlocutor. In her boredom, however, May felt like being a little cheeky despite Greta's obvious discomfort with lack of personal space, and danced around her to get close enough to listen in on the call. It was a little tricky to even discern where the sound would come from, but it soon became evident enough that the source was some sort of earpiece. "Did you have fun storming the castle?" said a cool voice that was barely audible enough for her to hear. She got a bit closer, but then Greta caught on to what she was doing and took a couple steps away to make space, eliciting a pout from the other. "Yeah, something like that," Greta replied shortly. Her response was subdued and had the faint scent of reluctance sprinkled about. Perhaps it was to be expected that any one-on-one conversation between the two would be awkward, considering what recent events had transpired. "Listen, we need a ride. Some goon made off with our balloon." There was a beat of time where Greta listened to Scott's response. What it was, though, May was unable to tell through context alone. "Yeah, that would be great, thanks." "Yep, I'll let everyone know. Goodbye." And then Greta's talking ceased. She turned to face the others, a look of annoyance passed in her eyes to contrast the earnest, hopeful looks the others had in theirs. "So, I have good news and bad news. What do you want to hear first?" I vote bad," James chimed in with a raised hand. backing down a bit when Jesse and Meowth gave him a sign of disapproval. Not really caring either way, Greta went ahead and followed James's suggestion. So, the bad news then. By the looks of things, we'll be stranded here on the island for a little while, unless we can somehow figure out how to get the battle pyramid undocked from the battle fortress before then. Groans filled the area, with some holding their heads in frustration. But the good news! Scott said he'd be able to work with the authorities on one island to get a hold of a boat and some officers to apprehend the boss man here and the others we just fought. The groans, having died down a bit, were then supplanted by ambivalent light cheering. For most of them, the expectation of waiting didn't inspire much morale and only became worse when Brock, curious as to how long they should grow accustomed to playing watchdog for a Yakuza, inquired for the ETA. 3 hours at least, she answered, inciting more groans and, on Jessie's part, over-dramatic fainting. May, for her part, was rather silent, if only for her dread of having to wait, rendering her speechless. It always felt like there was a light at the end of the tunnel, only for her to realize that it was only because the tunnel itself was so deep and dark. With all those setbacks in such quick succession, she had already begun to grow doubtful that the end would ever come. Maybe there was another global threat that would keep her and Ash away from each other as soon as they stepped foot outside the facility, for all she knew. Despite this, knowing her luck, she figured they'd ultimately get out unscathed. Especially after all the other dangerous situations they got out of before, but she just wanted it all just to stop already. On the other hand, simply waiting for help to arrive was still quite trivial in comparison. Sure, the lack of stimulation in a dull and very battle-wrecked battlefield/research facility combo made sitting and discussing nothing in particular more mentally taxing than it normally would, but at least they could spend their time lazing about without being in any real danger. Such was the idea, at least. Eventually, though, not soon enough, an hour passed, and then 2. As they tapped into whatever patience they had left, their nervous energy had eventually reached a boiling point. Jesse and James, hunger setting in, had started bickering about nothing in particular. Cindy got bored and chased a particularly non-consenting Meowth around in a game of tag, quote-unquote, and Happiny simply watched in amusement. The others tried to calm everyone else down, but with limited success. It soon became obvious that all they could do was wait and pray that their saviors hadn't forgotten them already. Yeah, pun, because of the frontier brains. Oh, okay, so you do get it. Ha 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 ha! You do get it. Wait, why are they bringing Cassie and Butch? Why not? They're members of Team Rocket. It's for the same reason they're bringing Giovanni, right? Bro caught Ho in an Ultra Ball. He's built different. I mean, haven't most of us caught Ho in an Ultra Ball? Like, we're surely not the only ones who had a Master Ball that we could have used on a Legendary, but then like, what if I need this later? And then we never use it. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like Citizen's Arrest in a sense. But yeah, anyway. After 3 hours, though, everyone's ears perked up when Greta suddenly dropped the conversation she was having with Annabelle, rose to her feet, and turned away from the group with a finger in her ear. Everyone else, despite their weariness and pessimism, still looked to her with wide eyes and bated breath. After a couple seconds, she gave the all clear with a grin and a thumbs up. Guys, I think they're here! The ensuing collective sigh of relief was as the sound of divers gasping for air after what felt like an eternity under the waves. Without a moment to waste, they picked themselves off the ground, stretched, and celebrated with a couple jigs. And before long, they were met with a number of armed officers, accompanied by Growliths, seemingly led by what looked to be Officer Jenny. It took all of May's willpower to keep Brock's romantic impulses at bay, and she was left wondering what would give out first, her fingers or his ear. The group led the officers to the disgraced Team Rocket leader, still sitting patiently on the ground with his limbs bound. Jenny, ever ecstatic to be the one to catch such an infamous target, unbound his hands, only to immediately cuff them. I can't say I ever thought I'd see the day when you, of all people, were finally in police custody, she mused aloud, to which Giovanni silently spat in annoyance as he was dragged away. The marvel of the sight, as satisfying as it was undermined, however, when May felt a cold clasp snap around her own wrists, and was just as shocked to see everyone else seemingly being put into handcuffs as well. The officer cuffing her, well aware of her sudden onset of anxiety, made sure to alleviate her concerns. "Don't worry," he said. "We just want to ask all of you a few questions when we return to One Island." The comment did little to make her feel better, honestly, but what was she supposed to do? Resist arrest? Somewhat humiliated by the situation, she sighed and desperately prayed to whatever deity could hear her. Will this never end? I mean, that's fair, I guess. You never played Go, though, so no ho for you, because... Darn tower puzzle? Wait. Was it? I don't remember the puzzle being that bad. Huh. But yeah, but that's definitely me to a T, though. Like, I would just... I will often just save my Master Ball, just in case, oh, what if I need it, though? And then I never use it. It's just too awesome to use, as TV Chose would put it. The others didn't fare much better than she did. Greta and Annabelle were just as startled, but upon closer inspection, didn't seem to look as surprised. The Team Rocket trio were panicked out of their wits, but still bit the bullet and complied with their order to move. And Cindy had to be talked out of simply running away in a terrified scream by a much more composed Brock. Ash simply didn't have the wherewithal to resist, and so went along with whatever he was told. Of course, for someone on the verge of sleep, he might as well have been a marionette with a snoring problem. The group were promptly escorted down the series of stairs and back out of the building. The sun hung directly overhead, its rays mingling uncomfortably with the high humidity and lack of a breeze, but was otherwise rather pleasant. It was probably just past noon, May thought to herself, as she and the others were herded into motorboats, seemingly outfitted for police use. As directed, she sat next to Ash and Brock onto the uncomfortable wooden seats and waited patiently for the rest of the group to be seated. When the officers were also seated, Jenny raised her hand to signal her intent to speak. "All right, everyone," she began with a sharp tone. "I know you probably have a bunch of questions to ask, but I promise you that we will get you all processed as soon as we can. Our final stop is the Pokemon Center on One Island, where we intend to take you in for questioning about what has been going on around the Sevii Islands lately. Plus, you and your Pokemon likely require rest and nourishment after today, so you'll be able to take care of that when we're done as well." May could hear gulps coming from Jesse, James, and Meowth, but Jenny didn't seem to take notice. "It'll probably be a couple hours or so before we get there, so hang tight. And please, take care to keep your arms inside the boat at all times. You know, just use common sense." With that, she turned around to sit down and commanded the other officer at the helm to move ahead standard. May felt herself lurch backward from the sudden start, and so held tight onto her seat to keep herself from toppling into the person sitting behind her, who just so happened to be Greta. She thought she could hear others not being so quick on their feet, indicated by the oops that normally would follow a collision with another, but she didn't think it very wise to look behind her to check when she was barely able to get a grip looking straight ahead. Not to mention that the situation left her stiff and wishing she could turn invisible just so it could be over with already. Soon enough, the boat decelerated when it reached its normal speed, and no longer did May feel the need to cling onto her seat for dear life. Now, she figured, all that she could do then was to follow the officer's advice and enjoy the ride. Despite the shock of apparently being treated like a criminal, she gazed to her left to see a blue horizon spanning for miles outward, with the Wingull flying overhead and seeming to follow the boat in a game of tag. After the surprise encounter with Team Rocket that left her bedridden for half a week, she realized she never really had much time to appreciate the sights, feel the breeze, or enjoy the rhythmic rocking of the waves. It would have been nice to have the chance to do so, alone with Ash, and not packed on a motorboat with a bunch of sardines, but at that point, she'd take what she could get. Plus, there was always the time after questioning, right? After everything blew over, she and Ash would finally get their long-awaited time to themselves. Yeah, that's right. Just the two of us. Her eyelids grew heavy, and her head cocked to the side in the search for support before gently settling on Ash's shoulder. He didn't object, and, in fact, laid his own head on hers in kind. Soon enough, the couple drifted off to what little sleep they could get despite the loud motor and the lack of a bed rest. Just about as soon as May was finally able to nod off, the boat started to slow to a halt. She was hesitant to open her eyes after her near orbit with the warm embrace of sleep. All she wanted was to remain undisturbed and unburdened with human contact besides ashes. But a couple of prods to her shoulder all but guaranteed a postponement of such a luxury. She grimaced as the bright light of the late afternoon sun startled her slumbering pupils. After a gentle massaging of her eyes and a minute to grow acclimated to the change, she was roused once more, although noticeably less content. The others seemed to echo her sentiment, as groans and complaints nearly drowned out the instructions that the officers were giving, to the point where only a sudden screech from a megaphone could suffice to silence their tongues. "All right, now that I have your attention," Officer Jenny said, somewhat annoyed at the clamor, "we have reached one island. As we mentioned before, our final destination is the Pokemon Center. Please stick close by to us, and please just be patient while we escort you." As per the officer's request for silence, the others didn't speak much beyond more than a whisper while they walked through the empty streets. But they still yet cannot resist vocalizing their grievances with standard procedure, quote-unquote, or whatever the archipelago's law enforcement called it. The only ones who didn't see it fit to complain was Ash and Pikachu, the former of which was still sleeping, no doubt a lingering side effect of the mind control from earlier. Despite numerous creative attempts to get him to awaken, slaps, water on the face, hanging upside down, etc., he still wouldn't budge. And so the services of a particularly beefy officer had to be employed to get him mobile. When everyone was settled, they were off. May looked around with melancholy as they strolled through on the sidewalk. Despite the gorgeous weather, it was saddening to see that the events from the other day still had a drastic impact on the tourism on the island, which was still mostly deserted, besides a few courageous onlookers. There were no model surfboards in sight. The jet skis were now more than likely kept in storage, and the pink bikini that had previously caught her eye was imprisoned behind a darkened glass window. She remembered the ice cream they had before as well, only to see that the stall had served it was nowhere in sight. That in particular stung her, and not just because the blazing sun and the lack of a gentle breeze were cooking her alive. She also just simply craves something sweet to get some semblance of comfort in the whirlwind of recent events. Hot and dejected, everyone trudged along the road silently, until the Pokemon Center in the distance grew larger. Half were happy the ordeal was nearly over, but the other half, May included, bellyached at the fact that, in order to see the end, they'd have to climb uphill just to reach the doors. It certainly wasn't a venture up Mount Everest, of course, but the walk of shame they'd been hiking had them so wanting to get everything over with that even an anthill was enough to force a whimper from the strongest willed among them. Wrong song. Oopsie poopsie. Fortunately, a few minutes later, they finally had a foot through the automatic doors, which, this time, opened of their own accord without issue. The bunch scrambled in, and as soon as they were released from their handcuffs and given the go-ahead, collapsed onto the ground in a panting, sweaty heap. The sudden burst of dry, cold air from the air conditioning was simply a godsend. And for a moment, it was as though the torment from minutes ago had been wiped from their memory completely. Being able to stretch their arms without hurting their wrists was just a bonus. Also, hi, Yubi! I'm doing well, how about you? Just finishing off May's Crush Final Frontier? Yeah, I'm hugging you back, Yubi. Nurse Joy, be it by force of habit or contractual obligations, swung around the front desks to gather everyone's Pokemon and all around just brace spirit. Her blissy partner followed close behind with a stretcher to take a now sleeping Pikachu and Meowth to the back room with the rest, leaving everyone else without Pokemon to their name, while the police seized the opportunity to grill them on what was happening while they were defenseless. In the lobby stood what remained of the ransacked network machine, still riddled with large holes and emptied of its many necessary components. Scott himself was mere feet away. He raised a hand to greet May's party, and even walked up to initiate a much-needed catch-up conversation. But he was immediately stopped as officers gathered in front of the group to individually question each person. A feeling of dread loomed over May as one such officer approached her. He seemed pleasant enough, but the encounter itself still left her uncomfortable, on edge, and just a little bit ashamed. Even so, she quickly reasoned that the process would have been much quicker and far less painful if she complied with questioning and showed no signs of resisting. And so, when prompted to speak, she began regaling her story. A tale fraught with love, danger, and perhaps just a bit too much water. See what I did there? This would have been rated 7.8 out of 10 by IGN. Oh, you're in bed now? Alright, sounds good, Yubi. Sleep well. Glad to see you for at least a few seconds. Or at least a couple minutes. Mm-hmm. See, you get it, Aiden. You get it. You saw what I did there. Okay, now there is one thing I need to check, though, because I swear I made fixes to this chapter, but I don't know if they got uploaded. Let's see here. Hmm. Huh. Wait a minute, did I even update this? I thought I did. Okay, you know what? I'm gonna have to use a different document here. Hold on. Crud. I thought I updated this. And I mean, went to Alola 4 gens later, and well, come on. Hey, at least I mean, it makes extra. I mean, it makes sense in Alola too. Alola is an archipelago. You know. Yeah, I did make some changes, or like some improvements to this chapter. Okay, yeah, here we go. All right. Okay. Oof. Hold on a second. Sorry, I have to do some finagling with my browser windows here. Okay, here we go. I think we're good. And that's my point. Nobody complained about Alola having too much water. And yes, Alola makes sense, but Hoenn is a coastline country. It makes sense also. I mean, yeah, I agree. It does. And I mean, diving was cool. I enjoyed diving. I mean, yeah, I guess the encounter rate was maybe a little bit high-ish in the ocean, you know, on the ocean routes, but I still like the summer vibe. Like, I love summer vibes. Part of the reason why I love Super Mario Sunshine so much, you know? Yeah, I know that I'm not complaining about it. Yeah, I know that you were talking about the general you there. Yeah. I got you. All right. Okay, I think I'm good now. Let us continue. And that's what happened. They finally concluded after what must have been an hour of talking. Her throat had long since grown dry, and so she was constantly gasping for the glass of water the officer had graciously fetched for her earlier. She couldn't be sure how her audience of one would take her story, so was quite conscientious to not over-embellish it. Her concern that maybe he didn't believe her grew as she drew closer to the end. On the one hand, the officer was respectful enough not to interrupt her beyond the odd here and there. But then on the other, there was little way to tell if what she was saying was really making an impression. The two sat in silence across from each other for an uncomfortably still minute while she braced herself for the officer to make some sort of move. She held her breath in a stroke of fear and realized from her lungs' need for oxygen that both had been waiting for longer than what was probably necessary. Cautious, she chimed, "Well, is this good?" She asked herself if there was a part of her story that was just a bit too unbelievable, or perhaps a part where she dedicated a few too many minutes, and the constant thinking added kindling to an already smoldering anxiety under the surface. The officer scratched the back of his head pensively. "Just to make sure I have everything straight here, you categorically deny any association with this organization?" A tad miffed, her mind drifted to a few choice words. "Were you really not paying any attention to what I said? They almost blew me up?" Ultimately, she left them unsaid. Little need to sully whatever already tenuous standing she had in his eyes. Instead, she nodded and acknowledged in the affirmative. "I see. So you posit then that you had led a charge against Team Rocket yourself to rescue your boyfriend?" Oh, well, she wasn't sure if led was the proximate word in this case, but she elected to put pedantry aside for a moment and responded, "Yeah." "That was a very brave decision," he said with very little change to his facial expression. "And also very reckless, I hope you're aware. Why did you contact the police about this?" "We had no choice," she said without hesitation. "If we waited for the authorities, they'd have taken the Sapphire from Scott and used it for their own network machine before they even got the message. We had to take the fight to them as quickly as we could." There was also the fact that they'd be willingly handing Jesse, James, and Meowth to their legal doom if they went that route. A small detail she left unsaid for obvious reasons. "You didn't think it wise to escort Scott to the police with you? Surely you must have realized that he, and thus the Sapphire, would have been safe under our purview?" May's sudden burst of confidence fizzled out as she scrambled to come up with some sort of justification that would appease him. There wasn't much that she could even consider that hadn't implied she was acting irrationally. There was just something in her code that compelled her to shoulder all the responsibility she could. Was it learned? Innate? If she had never met Ash, whose lean towards acting on instinct more often than not informed or even consistently overrode his sense of reason or valor? See what I did there as well? Would she have perhaps acted more cautiously? I mean, I guess you have a point there, she reluctantly conceded, unable to defend herself. I guess it just sort of became personal. Again, the officer's facial expression did not change much. It still apparently was set to a default blank, non-judgmental look. However, he did respond with, "That's understandable enough. All's well that ends well, I suppose," after jotting down a few more things in his notebook. "I think that's everything. You're free to go, miss." Wait, just like that? Not that she was going to complain, but telling her story seemed a little too simple. "That's right. There are no strings attached," he said between chuckles, noting her confused look. "I do have one more question, though. I'd say it would be very far-fetched to assume you'd be in cahoots with them after your statement, but why do you think Brandon of the Frontier Brains would be involved?" Brandon? Why would he think that she had any idea? And why did he even care? After May asked as much, he responded, "Because if you consider the fact that you said he fought against your party in the Battle Fortress, don't his other actions strike you as odd? I mean, you said you suspect him of being the one who saved you and your boyfriend on Mount Ember, right? He had a point, she thought. She never could put her finger on it before, but Brandon never had a clear allegiance to anyone, it seemed. Even Scott told her as much long before. In addition to that, he was reticent about any of his goals to the end. But why? Oh, you missed that one? I brought up instinct, valor, and reason. Reason implying mystic. I mean, that reason was the closest word that I had to mystic. So, the teams of Pokemon Go! Anyway. They just hate Hoenn because it's top 3 gens. For sure! I mean, Gen 3 is my favorite gen. For sure. I mean, it has my favorite Poke Girl in it, too, so, you know what? I'm biased. And as we all know, my favorite Poke Girl is Winona! No, I'm kidding. It's me. But anyway. I mean, see, a guy who wrote advanced shipping fanfiction has May as his favorite Poke Girl. What a surprise. Gosh dang it. May shook her head in frustration as she racked her brain, but ultimately came up with nothing. She did tell him she agreed that Brandon was still rather fishy, but that was all she could definitively say for sure. Very well, he said. That's a shame. Perhaps it'll be made more clear after we finish questioning the others. Please, feel free to go about your business and rest if you need to. And then the officer turned around and departed, leaving May heaving a deep sigh of held breath and letting the last drop of nervous sweat fall from her brow. Was it finally done? Was she finally free? There were no other obligations to keep her in a constant state of alertness. Almost paranoid, she waited for a moment, and then 30 minutes passed without any other officer paying her mind. All were far too preoccupied grilling the others to notice that she had been sitting alone, silent. You never would have seen that coming? I know, plot twist, right? It's crazy. It wasn't until Brock was done being questioned that May realized just how worried she was about her survival, physical or otherwise. A wave of relief she had scarcely felt before in her life washed over her and nearly brought her to tears. Even though the hunger that she managed to suppress for the past day or so started to flare into a boil in her stomach, she didn't bother getting out of her seat to fetch some food. Instead, she sat back in whatever way she could and enjoyed whatever iota of solitude she found herself granted. It wasn't long, however, before even more people got finished with their questioning. Cindy was released next, followed closely by Ash, who had been wearily carrying Pikachu like a zombie. Greta and Annabelle took a significantly longer time before they were let go. Understandable, perhaps, given how much they were involved in the scheme to begin with. Tucker and Brandon, on the other hand, were clear exceptions. They were still in custody over an hour into questioning. And Giovanni, Cassidy, Butch, and, worryingly, Jesse, James, and Meowth were to be held indefinitely. It was after hearing about it from Scott that May stood up in indignation. They can't do that! She burst aloud forcefully, startling everyone in earshot. Don't they know what Jesse, James, and Meowth have done to help? I understand how you feel, Scott replied considerably more calmly. But it's not like we could have expected otherwise. I myself got a very stern interrogation just for having been loaned money from their boss. I can only imagine how much worse they'd have it if they were actual members of Team Rocket. Still, though, isn't there, I don't know, some sort of Good Samaritan law or something that protects them? Well, I'm no lawyer, but those don't apply to actual crimes they committed, I'm afraid. Stealing back from a robber doesn't make you immune from being prosecuted for being a robber yourself way back when. Plus, remember, May, Brock said, there's no guarantee that they'd even turn over a new leaf anyway. That's the assumption the police are going by, I bet. Well, I don't think that's right either, Ash said while still clutching his head. They tried to help us even after all that horrible stuff I did to him. Is there anything we can do to stop it? I think they've earned another chance. It's not like they'd even have a choice of going back to their old ways anyway. Scott raised his hands in surrender. Look, kids, I agree with you. I really do. I even let the police know that I won't be pressing charges against them. But I'm not the one you need to convince. He motioned to Officer Jenny, who was standing just behind him, apparently unable to help herself from overhearing. What seems to be the problem, miss? She asked. My subordinate told me that he was done questioning with you. He even gave you good remarks for your storytelling ability. May ignored the compliment, unsure if it was genuine praise or just sarcasm. Also, May and your Sevii said they blew you up. Well, she didn't say that out loud, actually. I probably didn't say that clearly enough, but that was left unsaid. She was just thinking those thoughts to herself. Those were words that she wanted to say, but she bit her tongue. Anyway. Or, oh no, wait, you're just adding on to what Brock said. Or, I don't know, you seem to be confirming that I did have the original intro. You know what, I'm just gonna stop here. I don't know what's going on anymore. Anyway. Okay, so you are adding what Brock said. Gotcha. Okay, so I am dumb. Okay, so we do have that established. Good. May ignored the compliment, unsure if it was genuine praise or just sarcasm. Is it true what Scott said? Are Jesse, James, and Meowth really staying under arrest? Officer Jenny's lips tightened and eyes narrowed in her apparent confusion. Those white-clad Team Rocket grunts? Yes, indeed. What of it? Grimacing, May stepped up and leaned forward in a sharp, exaggerated bow that caught the others by surprise. Please reconsider, she cried. If it weren't for them, we wouldn't have been able to stop Giovanni. The officer raised an eyebrow, but otherwise softened her nonplussed expression. Is that so? While your compassion is commendable, they're members of a dangerous organization. Perhaps you could explain why letting them off the hook would be the better outcome? May looked back up at the older woman and took a deep breath. Gladly, she replied forcefully. Accepting the invitation to continue, she went on to explain her concerns about the Team Rocket trio with a defensive fervor that would rival an attorney's. Well, okay, much of what she said was simply a repeat of what she told her subordinate well over an hour ago. But the fact remained that even Officer Jenny, who had surely seen years of impassioned defenses in court herself, seemed impressed with her resolve. I see, she muttered in a shocked daze when May said her piece. You're very convincing when you're full of energy, I gotta say. Well, did it work? May asked with a hopeful smile, hands clasped together in an earnest beg. To be honest, I'm not all that gung-ho about having those three prosecuted myself. Despite a few minor holes here and there, the testimony from each of you paints a very vivid picture of a wayward trio of friends battling against evil in an hour of need, or something like that. But, well, rules are rules. If they've been associated with a criminal enterprise, we're ethically obligated to investigate long and hard into their actions. May's heart began to sink, but she continued to hold her breath in anticipation when it was clear that Officer Jenny wasn't finished speaking. That said, Team Rocket's primary presence is in the Kanto region, and the Sevii Islands aren't strictly within Kanto's jurisdiction, so it's not technically against local law to merely associate with international criminal enterprises. The sinking in May's heart slowed to somewhere near halfway to her stomach. Oh, well, we'll put in a good word for them. That is, unless you want to press charges for them almost killing you, of course? May didn't hesitate to shake her head. No, of course not! I believe in them for helping me, so this is the least I can do to repay them. Jenny, satisfied with her Jenny smiled, satisfied with her answer. That's it, then. Your resolve is inspiring to me, so I'll personally see to it that the Kantonian government be convinced to show them some mercy. They'll be just fine, I swear it. Perhaps against her better judgment, May's spirits rose. How can you say that for sure? Call it a gut feeling, Officer Jenny simply said, flashing a thumbs up. May couldn't immediately explain why, but seeing her be that confident that things would be okay put her mind at ease and gave her lungs the permission to breathe properly again. For a moment, her attitude strongly reminded her of Ash's own. Well then, Jenny finally said. If that's everything, I'll be on my way. Just then May, just remembering something that was bothering her, raised her hand to stop her. Please wait just another moment, she said in a hurry. Before you go, I wanted to ask you what you guys will be doing with Brandon, too. Jenny's inquisitive look returned with a vengeance. Brandon? She asked with yet another raised eyebrow. Are you trying to save him, too? Oh, no, May babbled with waving hands. But there was something I was hoping to talk with him about, if you guys were done with him. Jenny paused for a moment, as if to process what exactly was going through May's head. It looked as though she was going to reject her strange request outright, but instead, we still have a few more hours scheduled with him. Normally, we wouldn't let unauthorized personnel question suspects, but considering how you've helped us today, we'll make an exception for you. But only for you. Come this way, and be sure to collect your Pokemon from Nurse Joy first. You know, just in case. May beamed in gratitude and briskly followed the officer's instructions, scrambling to the desk and asking for her Pokemon, who had just recently been treated for their injuries. After reclaiming all her Pokeballs, she quickly uttered a thank you to the nurse before turning once more to Officer Jenny, who guided her to one of the side rooms where the police had set up makeshift interrogation rooms. Giovanni had his own towards the end of the center's hallway, guarded by 2 sentries, vigilant and nearly unmoving. Right next to that one was Brandon's, also guarded by a sentry, albeit one who looked a bit less like he wanted to actually be there. Jenny shuffled past the relatively lazy sentry and loudly tapped a few times on the door. Officer Jenny here! Open up, please! For the next half minute, May could hear the sound of grunting and panting on the other side, and thoughts of Hollywood torture rushed through her mind as the grunting stopped and the door finally opened. When she was escorted past the threshold and looked inside, she realized, however, that Brandon himself, facing her once more with a scowl, looked reasonably healthy, besides the visible black eye, well, probably a result of being knocked out earlier. The door closed behind them, and then the grunting and panting she heard had resumed. Turns out that, instead of enhanced interrogation she heard about on TV, it was just because the officers previously interrogating him were simply barricading the door. A faulty lock, perhaps? Whatever the reason, when the officers were done moving the heavy bunk bed in front of the door, they turned around to face their suspect once more, and the young girl who had resolved to join them. You wish to ask him some questions yourself, Jenny? Oh, not me, she said, after which she motioned to May, who had already taken a seat on the bottom bunk of the other bed in the room. The other officers, despite their confusion, knew better than to question an esteemed colleague, and elected to hold their questions for another time. And so all eyes then turned expectantly onto May. The gazes were a little distracting, but she tried her best to ignore them in favor of trying to break the ice with a greeting. Hello, Brandon, she said, her tone not too confident as to be unapproachable, but also not too soft that he couldn't hear her. No response. The pressure forced an awkward laugh out of the girl. I guess saying hello won't do anything. Alright, listen, Brandon. There are still some things that have been bothering me. Some questions that are left unanswered. Brandon, for the first time since their meeting in the Battle Fortress, answered her in a sort of raspy tone that gave her the impression that he hadn't had anything to drink for days. And are these questions about me, specifically? Why? Because out of everyone involved in this whole thing, you're the biggest mystery of all. Although he acknowledged to himself that she was right, Brandon nearly chuckled still at the sheer audacity May had to even think she had the power to coerce a story out of him. I see. Well then, get on with it. What are your questions? She began with the first thing that crossed her mind, and the thing that, up to that point, bothered her the most. I want to know your motives. That's a rather vague request. Says the guy who's given nothing but vague answers all this time, May thought with her tongue firmly held in place between her teeth. You wish to know my motives for working with Team Rocket despite knowing what atrocities they commit? It should be obvious by now, right? Surely you've seen the rare-colored Ho-Oh for yourself and even defeated it in battle. My goal in life's work has been to search for and study the legendary Pokemon. And I did everything in my power to stop you and your ilk from interfering. What else is there to say? Giovanni told me as much, May replied, recalling that he himself referred to him as a contractor of sorts. But she shook her head, dissatisfied. But no, that can't be all that it is. Of course it is, Brandon spat. As selfish as it may appear, I am an archaeologist. It was all a means to an end to satiate my hunger for knowledge. May was undeterred, still shaking her head. I'm sorry, but I think you're lying. Lying? I'm currently held against my will in a room with 3 people capable of compelling me to talk with physical force, or worse, if necessary. In what universe do you think I have a good reason to lie? Okay, maybe the fact that they got fired from said evil organization. True! True. That also would... I mean, that would also be a point in their favor. They're so bad at being evil they got fired. And that's the fact, though. You were shocked when you found out he was involved. You figure he was... Out of all of them, he wouldn't have even thought about it. Yeah, it's interesting, no? Interesting. Well, fine. Maybe you're not lying so much as you aren't even aware of the truth to begin with? I say you assume too much, especially when you consider the evidence. Prove me wrong, then. What gives you the impression that I'm lying? The stuff that happened before. When Tucker was attacking me and Ash, I mean. You were the one who stopped in the shadows, weren't you? Brandon took a moment to adjust the handcuffs that had been shaving his wrists. And if I was? Well, I mean, thank you, for one. If it weren't for you, we would have died for sure. Brandon grunted, apparently not paying any heed to her odd display of gratitude. But more than that, multiple things that happened then and even afterward were just bizarre. If you were the one who saved us, what were you even doing there hiding in the shadows to begin with? Why would you save me if you were just going to try to kill me later in the battle fortress and keep me from facing Giovanni myself? And why was Tucker so sure that I had the sapphire when he fought us back on 2 Island? Like that of a statue, Brandon's expression didn't much change. Methinks you've jumped a few too many guns. Let's say that I was the one who helped you and Ash on Mount Ember. What makes you think that I would even know what was going through Tucker's head when we was looking for that blasted thing? May's eyes lowered as a sly smile stretched from ear to ear. Oh, I'm sorry, she said in a faux apologetic tone. I didn't say it was Mount Ember where Tucker attacked us. That certainly shut him up. The only sound he could make was a scathing self-deprecation. Got him. But even in spite of that, Brandon was still maintained his adamance and seemingly refused to say anything else to the girl, averting her gaze like a child who had just spilled grape juice on the carpet. Brandon, you could tell me the truth now. I don't understand why you're being so secretive now, of all times. He looked as though he suddenly wanted to speak, but then hesitated just a moment before his tongue could move. After a couple seconds, he just went back to his original position of simply glaring past Officer Jenny and tightly sealing his lips anew. Are you that afraid of being found out? Surprisingly, this time Brandon nodded, giving me just the slightest hope that maybe they could get somewhere. You should know by now that secrets will not put you in a better position, Jenny said. If you don't at least try to defend yourself, you will be punished to the maximum extent of the law, I assure you. Is that what you want? He still didn't budge. Why are you so afraid? May asked in turn, beginning to sound desperate. I already know you were the one who helped us on Mount Ember, even though you were already waist deep into Giovanni's scheme by then. You can't have all been bad if you did the one thing that would have made your benefactor's life harder. And then, Brandon exhaled through his nostrils, as though to release all the stress that had possessed him up to that point, like a fumarole hissing from the side of a volcano. He then spoke, the cracks in the shackles around his throat beginning to form. I'm afraid if I tell you everything, all my work will be for naught. All for naught? Jenny asked. How much worse off can your work be where you're already in police custody? Because if I tell you anything, Giovanni will kill that homo! The room fell silent, following Brandon's first forceful outburst in a long while. So all that time, each insistence where he had been less than transparent with anyone as to what he was playing at, it was because of that? May especially felt uncomfortable at the thought of pressing him further, just like she would with any cornered animal ready to bite. However, despite the moment of emotional instability, she pushed against her discomfort, and sought to soothe him before the situation got worse. Brandon, May said gently. It's okay. The hoe will be fine. Look. May reached into her pack and pulled out an odd black and yellow ball. She rolled it around in her hand, careful to not let it fall to the floor, and waited for the telltale sign of Brandon's eyes bulging wide in recognition before she continued with a warm smile. Yes, you see, don't you? Giovanni isn't the traitor of the Ho-Oh anymore. I am. And I swear to you that no harm will come to it. Not by Giovanni, and not by anyone else. For a moment, May had started to fear that Brandon's reaction wasn't an especially positive one. His scowl remained, and his shoulders began to shake, as though the stress in his lungs had returned. However, his bulging eyes eventually softened, and his scowl soon curled into what she could only be described as a small smile of his own, a sight that she had since thought to be impossible, given his presumed slip into despair. So, the Ho-Oh is finally out of his clutches? And the device has been removed as well? She assumed he was referring to whatever it was that was keeping it under his control. Feeling confident once more, she nodded. If it's as you say, May, he then said, his raspy voice shaking in rhythm with his shoulders, an apparent attempt to hold back tears of relief. Then I'll trust you. Very well. I'll tell you everything I know. May looked around at the officers in the room. And besides the dark circles indicating a severe lack of rest, they looked almost impressed. If she were to wager a guess, she'd say they had little luck getting particularly good information out of him. Somewhat surprised she'd even have gotten that far herself were it not for her new 6th Pokemon, she nevertheless made it a point this time to not question the victories she took. And so she went back to the beginning. Would I be right in saying that this was your motive? Partially, Brandon answered with a quickness and relative straightforwardness that felt like a breath of fresh air for once. Perhaps not at first. Everything I did was indeed in pursuit of funding to look for Ho-Oh. But after the situation changed, it sort of became that. The situation changing being what? Well, as you're already aware, the funding and searching paid off. We found a variant of Ho-Oh much unlike the ancient accounts and hieroglyphs suggested, and we just saw it flying straight toward us. To see years of research and study realized in but an instant was a strange feeling for me, like an adrenaline high without the danger. I didn't think it very respectful to catch it, but Giovanni assured me at the time that it was necessary if either of our goals were to be realized. And so I let him do it. He took it down with ease and captured in that very ball you're holding now. From there, even though I wasn't partial to how he treated such a pristine specimen, my thoughts ultimately lay with the science to the exclusion of anything else. I wanted to study it. No, I had to study it. Brandon then stopped for a moment, and in the pause, May caught a glimpse of his cupped hands clenching. But as I should have expected, he had plans of his own. This isn't what we agreed on! Brandon yelled at Giovanni, cloaked in shadow. You told me we'd only be studying Ho-Oh, not experimenting on it! Giovanni's glare pierced through the dark veil and into his eyes, freezing him on the spot as if he were stalked by an Arbok. I said what I said, he replied, his outward tranquility belying a fiery wrath. We are studying the effects of the mind-hacking devices, including, but not limited to, the benefits of mind-hacking legendary Pokémon. Do you really think I would have gone along with this whole affair if I had known you would have been planning something so twisted? Did you really care all that much? Giovanni asked nonchalantly. You knew I'd be using your services to get a strategic foothold in the Sevii Islands, all in return for your chance to see Ho-Oh up close, and you didn't even bat an eye. Brandon shook his head in anger, some of which was directed at himself for being so myopic. Well, our arrangement ends here. I know now what you're planning to do to that Ho-Oh, and I also know what you've been doing to Annabelle in secret. How she can stomach dealing with the hell you put her through, let alone sing your praises with a straight face, will be a mystery that forever eludes me. I acknowledge I've been rather zealous in pursuit of my own goals, so I know I have no right to convince her she's been fooled, but all of this, is just too extreme. To this, Giovanni could only laugh to conceal the twitches in his eyes formed from rage. Backing out, are you? I hope you realize then there's a severance clause for every Faustian bargain. If Brandon's eyes narrowed any further, they'd have become slits. What are you saying? If you back out of our arrangement, or even so much as let loose your lips to the public about it, then I'll activate the kill switch that was implanted in the Ho-Oh's device. Just a click of a button. He pulled out what seemed to be a small remote control from his coat pocket. And the Ho-Oh's brain will melt into goo. Do you want that? Brandon's narrow eyes widened incredulously, and in his shock, he took a step backward to regain his lost balance, seized by a sudden spell of dizziness. You're insane, Giovanni, he mouthed, while his lost voice returned to him. In the aim of safeguarding my allegiance to you, you'd hold such a powerful Pokemon at gunpoint? You'd kill the ultimate golden goose in your possession? Oh, believe me, I'd rather we not go this route either. However, I can't afford to willingly have a rogue agent loose and jeopardize everything else I've already accomplished thus far. Besides, if your work is to be believed, there must be other different color Ho-Ohs somewhere in the world. I have enough resources to wait for another to come along, but you? If you did, well, you wouldn't have requested my help in the first place. Okay, you'll rephrase your statement from earlier. Giovanni caught Ho in one Ultra Ball. Man's built different. He didn't. Well, to be fair, Brandon didn't say it was one Ultra Ball. He just said it was in that Ultra Ball. And that he subdued it easily. But he didn't say how long it took him to subdue it easily. Okay, I guess I'm just being facetious now. You're a little shocked that Brandon, of all people, wouldn't have fallen for Giovanni's mind games. You always thought he was more intelligent. Would have fallen for Giovanni. You always thought he was a little more intelligent than that. Well, I mean, to be fair, I mean, so that's the thing about essentially holding something hostage. Like, you kind of have to play by the rules of the person holding the gun, you know? So I guess, in a sense, I don't know. Or unless you're talking about him getting on, you know, talking about him, you know, like, getting on top, you know, on board with this plan to begin with, you know? Which, I mean, archaeology doesn't pay the bills, as we said. Like, I mean, even the state of science nowadays is quite dire. Helping him even look real. Well, he did. Well, here's the thing. Money talks, unfortunately. Morals don't pay the bills. And, well, let's also just say here that I also had not a whole lot of information to work with, because a lot of this I am just kind of trying to divine from what PikamasterADV had laid out. So, you know, it was, it's complicated. It's complicated. Yeah. Giovanni Volpio, I'm sure there are other investors out there. Well, I mean, if there were, he probably would not have put himself in Team Rocket's hands for that. But if you think about it, if he didn't do that, then think about it. Giovanni would still be well, he would probably have, I mean, he would have progressed further in his plans. If it weren't for Brandon doing that instigating action, he would have, like, this entire story wouldn't have happened. Which means he wouldn't have gotten caught. I mean, up to the end of the Pokemon anime, Giovanni still wasn't caught, right? I'm not sure about it, because I haven't really watched anything past, like, Battle Frontier, I guess. I only know bits and pieces from the anime because when the Twitch Watches Pokemon Marathon was going on, I couldn't watch all of it because it was, it was a 24-hour thing. And, I had to sleep for some of it too, so. Well, and you're sure he would have gotten it eventually. Well, I mean, there is a 1 in 65,535 chance, yes, that he would have. Those are shiny odds in Gen 3, right? Well, actually, it would be even worse than that. Because there's no even guarantee that he would have even encountered Ho to begin with. But if he did, there was a chance that, he would have. And they found a shiny one on top of that. It's crazy. And you've seen all the way through the Gen 6 anime, and to your knowledge, he never was arrested because the other 3 bozos were still around, but you don't remember exactly? Okay, that's fair, that's fair. Oh man, so that means you were there when Ash got absolutely screwed out of that tournament, right? I remember that fight. Gosh dang it. Now I'm mad thinking about it. I need to stop this. I am feeling mad about this. Gosh dang it. Okay, yeah, you know what? I just need to get back to this. Need to get back to the cartoon. Yeah. Oh, wait, Inseno? Oh, Inseno? I was talking about Kalos. I don't actually remember. Didn't see the tournament arc in Sinnoh, but I did see the conclusion to the tournament in Kalos, and boy, he got robbed hard. Yeah, I need to watch like all the Pokemon anime in my old time. I need to do that. Maybe more advanced shipping fanfics will come out of it. Maybe. Eyes emoji. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Okay, anyway, back to the cartoon. Wow, was all May could find in her heart to say. It bothered her that there was little she could really bring up that was anything but a cool comfort. So she did all she could. She did all she could do in trying to move the conversation along. So the devices had a kill switch all this time? Such a cursed technology, Brennan snarled. It would seem that by having all the brains at his disposal, he thought he had procured a warehouse of Pandora's boxes that he was all too eager to open. Annabelle's powers were the obvious first point of study before he even got close to trailing the Ho-Oh. And apparently lying dormant in her is an ability far too potent for any sensible person to awaken willingly. But he studied it, with an academic zeal that rivaled even my own. If he was to be believed, he got far enough in to actually implement it on top of the general mind-hacking functionality she was able to perform on others, or whatever silly name fits it better. May shuddered as she realized in retrospect just how bad things could have gotten if she hadn't actually destroyed the devices in time. If I didn't do anything about them, does that mean Ash and Charizard would also have... She shook her head to get the image out, slapping her face for good measure. There was no use entertaining hypotheticals, she reminded herself. So, long story short, he essentially kept the Ho-Oh hostage to get you to keep doing his bidding because he knew you wouldn't risk its life. That's the long and short of it, yes, he replied, closing his glaring eyes. Go ahead, laugh. May refused. I couldn't laugh at someone being forced to make a choice like that. Well, even so, it was a weakness he exploited. He had me gripped by the neck so tightly I couldn't risk slighting him. One mistake would have been all it took to ruin everything. Some pieces were falling into place, finally. However, there is still plenty more confusion to clear up. So, now I understand why you were so secretive all this time, but that doesn't explain why you bothered helping us in the first place. After all, if you were afraid Giovanni was going to catch you in the act, why would you do it? Brandon opened his eyes once more and glanced upward in deep thought, his words taking time to conjure. And my help, I presume you're referring to the Mount Ember incident? May nodded. Well, this was before we encountered the Holo Mind. I was still granted some measure of autonomy in my daily schedule. Perhaps it was a weakness of will or just an overactive conscience that I did it, but you could say that I was just doing my part to be a spanner in their operation from almost the beginning. After all I found out about his experiments on Annabelle. Tucker, in contrast, was all in on his plans, perhaps for reasons greedier than my own, which says volumes. After I heard about his ambitions regarding the network machine, I knew that if Team Rocket had gotten a hold of the Ruby and Sapphire, on top of finishing their research into Annabelle's powers, their hold on the Sevii Islands would have been unbreakable, and that I would have played a huge part in securing that bond. So I did what any ethical scientist would do and tried to fight it in secret. Just one way I did my part was assisting you and Ash on Mount Ember. To be completely honest, though, that wasn't solely for your benefit. Yes, I did make sure my partner Reggie Ice froze the magma pit so Ash could survive his fall, but with the Hyper Beam, I was aiming to weaken his team so you could then swipe the Ruby back from him. If I succeeded with that, then Team Rocket's foothold on the Sevii Islands would have hit a brick wall. But Tucker made up making off with the Ruby anyway. May followed up slowly, connecting more of the dots. Brandon nodded. Precisely. I didn't quite expect to use the rock opening we created as his escape route, but... well, I guess he's the Domace for a reason. Still, I couldn't let slide that he almost brought innocent people to their deaths, so rest assured I let Giovanni know about that incident. Wait, did you tell him that you were trying to stop Tucker from getting the Ruby? Brandon laughed. A rarity, especially given his situation. Oh, of course not! He already got the Ruby by that point, so there was no need to blow my cover. All I told him was that Tucker was making a scene, and that I stopped him from killing you two. It worked well enough that, for some reason, he didn't probe further. In fact, all he had done was ask me to tell other people he personally ordered me to intervene if I was asked. Most likely all in a desperate attempt to curry favor with the authorities in the event all his plans were foiled, or to distance himself from his underlings. No doubt he's telling the same story in the other room as we speak. Officer Jenny, shaking her head in amusement, chuckled to herself as she listened. Yeah, you certainly got that right. Brandon chose to ignore the snide yet agreeable remark. In the end, you guys were safe, but with Tucker making off with one of the two necessary components to reverse engineer the network machine, that left us less room for error to keep him from getting the other. And so I had to resort to a little duplicity. Duplicity, May asked. By which you mean? Trickery, beguilement, whichever word of the day you like. I refer, of course, to Tucker's impression that you had the Sapphire in your possession on 2 islands, as you recalled earlier. Upon hearing her suspicions confirmed, May gave him a mean look. So even though you knew he was crazy and tried to kill me before, you still thought it was a good idea to have him think I had what he wanted? Brandon lowered his face, the impact from her glare piercing him to his soul and forcing him to cower. Yes, I understand that was underhanded of me. It was necessary, however, in order to keep him off the scent for as long as possible. And it worked, at least for a while, considering he completely ignored the dotted hole before he realized the truth on 2 Island. She backed off a bit with her forceful demeanor and pouted, crossing her arms. Well, still, could have warned us at least. We could have played along and let him on, and then we could have gotten the Sapphire before Team Rocket even thought about checking us there, right? Or even thought about checking there, right? That idea did cross my mind, but considering Giovanni had eyes everywhere out there, and on you and your friends in particular, he'd have caught on quickly. May sighed, still somewhat aggravated, thought of being targeted on false pretenses, but she did see it in her heart to be more understanding. The alternative would have been to target some random person somewhere else, which would have perhaps been even more risky. Brandon probably knew she had some means of defending herself, or, at the very least, a posse to come to her aid if she needed it. Some unwary person on the street would probably not have been so lucky. You did fairly well enough anyway. You got to the Sapphire before they did, and even found a way to recruit Greta and Annabelle to your side. The latter, unsurprisingly, considering the baggage I'm sure she now carries in light of her momentary tenure under Giovanni. May gulped as she recalled the unthinkable horror she came to realize during her talk with Giovanni regarding Annabelle's experimentation. She was reluctant to ask for more details, and honestly, the thought of doing so gave her a sour stomach. As far as she was concerned, she had heard enough about it and just wanted to forget. And with that, Brandon said with an air of finality and his composure that brought May back down to reality. I believe I've told you all that I know. Believe me or disbelieve me if you will, but I've said all that I could. Unless you can think of something else I missed. She certainly couldn't think of anything. His explanation, she thought, was rather thorough. Maybe even a bit too thorough. Despite all the sense his story made to her, May couldn't help but feel that it was all just a tad convenient. She could scarcely shake the part of her mind nagging her that maybe his entire story was suspect on the grounds of being some sort of a revisionist defense aimed at helping him save face. She didn't forget, after all, that he still sought out a loan from Team Rocket simply to continue his research, and, as a result, enabled a number of atrocities to pay it back with interest. Then again, a certain individual said the same thing about Scott once before, and were fortune absent, he would have taken his life for it. So, in the end, May abstained from passing judgment on the brains, sans Tucker and Lucy. Whether or not he was being completely candid with her, or even whether or not Giovanni had the right of it and Brandon was simply trying to lead her astray, she found it beyond her ability to entertain either way. All she cared about at that point was that whatever had happened, it was over, and that the closure she had was enough for her. Finally, May stood up, taking care to not hit her head on the top bunk, and stretched off some of the weariness that had crept into her limbs. I think that's everything, Brandon. Thank you for telling me your story, she said with a polite bow. Brandon, for his part, nodded in acceptance. You're welcome. I hope this at least gives you closure in light of all this madness. Yeah, it does. Thanks again. She then turned to Officer Jenny and the others who had been listening in and offered them the same sort of thanks. And like Brandon, they accepted. Getting the hint that she was ready to leave, they went over to the makeshift barricade in front of the door and pushed it out of the way, giving her the opportunity to open the door and slip through. Before she could, however, Brandon stopped her with a sudden call. Actually, before you go, I'd like to ask you something myself. May peeked her head from behind the door. Sure. What is it? Brandon shifted a bit uncomfortably in his chair, as though he wasn't sure whether or not he really wanted to ask. Take good care of that Ho-Oh, will you? When I'm free once more, and I will be eventually, I would very much like to see it again from time to time. He noticed her surprise and quickly scrounged up an apology before following up with, If you wouldn't mind, of course. May, though indeed surprised, didn't think much of it, and smiled. Of course, we'll stay in touch. She could tell that Brennan's comfort was supplanted with elation when she didn't object to the idea. His shoulders loosened from being stiff throughout their conversation, and he let go of the grip that was digging his nails so far into his palm they nearly bled. He nodded at her in thanks before closing his eyes, relieved, but clearly tired in his own right. A feeling she related to all too well. Ready to leave, May slipped through the door once again and walked back to the lobby, where most of her friends had been waiting. They didn't seem to notice her arrival despite the sound of her dragging footsteps. Perhaps they were too focused on their conversation to do so. What it was, she had too little energy to commit to memory or pay attention herself. Instead of greeting them and interrupting their chat, she eyed one of the vacant couches nearby and plopped down. Their conversation seemed to continue unabated, although the voices themselves grew muffled as the temptation of sleep began to possess her. Her eyes slid shut, and though she was within earshot, she could no longer make out any of the voices or even notice that anyone was there anymore. After a couple of minutes, the hunger haunting her was finally overshadowed by her need to rest, and it, like everything else around her, simply faded out of existence. And that is the end of Chapter 41. Okay, going back to him being robbed. Infernape Torterra Staraptor Gliscor, OP AF Pikachu, and he lost only because of some legendaries? Yeah, that's yeah, legendaries are cringe. Like, people who play meta are cringe. Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I'm fairly confident Brandon would speak the truth. he is a righteous man and just sort of was in the wrong place with the wrong person, but got himself there with no ill intentions. Yeah, I mean, he did the best with what he had. And, you know, he did make mistakes, but he also tried his best to remediate them in the end. And, well, he did a pretty good job of that considering, you know, all the events that, after, how things ended up, But, there was still the fact, that while under Giovanni's eye, he couldn't really do much else besides that. So, I mean, yeah, so that is the reason. I know this was left unsaid in the story, but that is the reason why he attacked May in the Battle Fortress after all, was because Giovanni was watching. He was watching every room. I mean, he knew that they were outside the entrance after all, because the door opened without Greta inputting that, that code completely. So, if Brandon turned tail, well, Giovanni would have done the unthinkable, So. You get it now? Yeah! Yep, you get it. You get it. Yep, she was picking the Frontier Brain's brain. Yeah, I don't know how that one came to me, but it worked. All right. So now what I need to do is I need to go to the bathroom. So we will be on a short break. We will be back shortly. And so I can go to the bathroom. So get drinks, get refreshments, get whatever you need, because the final chapter is approaching. And I can't believe I managed to squeeze in like more than an hour here. I mean, I know this was how long it was going to take, but I like the pace I'm going. It's brilliant. That's how it came to you. Thank you, Aiden. I appreciate that. All right. Well, anyway, okay. I gotta go to the bathroom. I will be back. So enjoy the Xenoblade 3 music while I'm gone. Okay, I am back, and also thank you for the biddies, Orville. And the punch as well. Thank you for the biddies and the punch. How are you doing, Orville? Ah. Okay. Well. Alright. Bathroom break is done. We went grocery shopping? Nice. I hope you got some good stuff. Like, maybe Orville popcorn, maybe?
Boo! You stink!
Oh, come on, it wasn't that bad of a joke! Come on, it wasn't that bad. It's criminal how good that track is for being the menu music for the game. I know, right? I love that song so much. I'm thinking about like adding like other ones, like have one like be selected at random, but I'm not sure how exactly I'd do that. I'm not sure exactly how to do that. It may involve WebSockets or something, but we'll see. We'll see. But for now, I love Xenoblade music. And that was a good one, Mochi. Where oh, you're talking about the popcorn thing? Okay, well, thank you. At least someone liked it. But all right. Okay. Now, I hope everyone had a good break. We are ready to begin this thing. We're ready to continue this thing. Oh, actually, no. Maybe you're not. Hold on. I probably need to move the... the sticky notes again. Oh, I don't know. They're a pretty good place. Okay, yeah, okay. I think this will work. Okay. How was my Mario Day? My Mario Day was... Okay, that was Monday, right? Last week? Yeah, okay, it was a week ago, yeah. It was... interesting. We were supposed to have our Ludi match then. And our opponent, like, the opposing team, the team captain of the opposing team is... Okay, you'd probably have to ask Pika for all the details, because, oh boy, it is a saga, but let's just say that he is a meanie, he's a meanie head butt face, and is still making it an absolute pain to schedule a match with them. So, long story short, we thought the match was going to be like at 5. They claimed they thought it was going to be at 4. They got all mad about it, tried it, and brought it up to the TOs, saying that we didn't show up, even though You're literally talking with them, trying to schedule a time. And even the TOs got involved, and yeah, this guy has just big Karen energy, basically. Yeah, it's St. Patrick's Day, and I'm agreeing with that. Oh man, this would have been great. Time for me to do a Patrick impression, but I turned that off because it's story time. His team should have a forfeit then by default. I mean, the TOs ruled it, saying that like that there was miscommunication there. Like technically there was miscommunication on both sides. Thank you, Orbel. There was miscommunication on both sides, and it made it so that confusion was understandable. So they're letting us reschedule it without a penalty. Which, thank you, TOs, for doing that. But that still wasn't enough for them because I think he was mad that his team didn't get a free 5-0. So yeah. Sounds like a personal problem. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. There's more to the story too that I won't get into because, you know, story time, but like you're like story time, like I want a cute romantic story time, not a frustrating want to tear your hair out because of buttheads who play Splatoon story time, but you know. They're still giving us a hard time for a match, then their team should be forfeit. I mean, perhaps it may come to that. We'll have to see. Because as it is, we are rescheduling it to like the default time, which is like a sacrosanct time that I think is like mandated by Ludi rules. So like, if they can't make that one, but we can, I mean, like, there's nothing we can do. There's nothing we can do about that. You don't want cute and romantic and a little press. Well, okay, there's more to it than that. But, I mean, there's more to it than that. But hey, it's a shipping fanfic. It's gotta end that way, right? Anyway. anyway. Also, it'll be fine, and you're getting in there, getting in there. Getting in there. That's all good. Okay, now I feel like I've done more stalling in between chapters than I have actually starting this entire stream, so you know what? I'm just gonna stop it now. Okay, chapter 42, the very last chapter of Maze Crush Final Frontier. So long, and thanks for all the Corphish! See what I did there? Huh? Y'all see what I did there too? I don't know. You probably should. Chapter 42, so long, and thanks for all the Corphish. The next few days raced by rather quickly, largely thanks to all the sleep May and Ash alike caught up on. The former ended up sleeping for the rest of the night. The latter, on the other hand, was practically comatose for 3 whole days, only getting up a select few times for food in the bathroom before sleeping once more in one of the hostel rooms. She and Brock were worried that maybe he had suffered permanent brain damage, but then they recalled that Cindy had shown similar symptoms after being possessed earlier and had eventually gotten better. And so they held out hope that it was only a matter of time, although May didn't think it gave her an excuse to not keep a close watch on him to monitor his condition in case it did go south. The others understood and left the couple to themselves while Ash recovered. Keeping watch wasn't the most eventful job in the world, so she caught herself dozing off at his bedside more than once. On the 4th morning, she lifted her head off the drool-soaked sheets to find Ash's body no longer in bed. Originally not thinking much of it, she lowered her head back down onto a drier section and closed her eyes, but then she sprang upright and hit her head on the top bunk, which she put 2 and 2 together. Her hind legs moved on their own accord out of the room and sprinted down the hallway and into the dining hall, where she found Ash, Cindy, Brock, Annabelle, and Greta munching on bacon and toast and chewing the fat, both metaphorically and literally. Ash almost choked on his food when he realized he had found himself in a surprise bear hug from behind, which May promptly apologized for before Barry hugging him again anyway. He was more prepared the second time and took it in stride despite the fact his omelet was now further out of reach. Annabelle was somewhat mute about what was happening, while the others simply found it hilarious and took a moment to appreciate it before May let go and helped herself to a large helping of breakfast herself. "So, Ash," May said after sitting down in front of her huge platter and taking a bite, "how are you feeling?" "Never felt better!" he exclaimed, taking care to not chew with his mouth visibly open. "I can actually look at things now without my head feeling like it's about to explode." "Yeah, I know the feeling," Cindy responded, her elbows resting next to her own plate, emptied of everything except strings of bread crusts. "No fun at all." Annabelle caught wind of the slight glare headed her way inside. "Yes, I know. Once again, I'm very sorry about that." Cindy uttered a rather unconvincing, "It's fine," before staring back at her food scraps. May was about to object to her sour attitude, but before she could, Annabelle shot a look at her, telling her to not press the matter further. She reluctantly acquiesced, but only because she could still easily distract herself with another strip of bacon sitting on her plate. Hoping to change the subject himself, Ash swallowed and posited a question of his own. "So, where are Team Rocket and the others now?" "Well," Rock began, "all I know is that Tucker, Lucy, and Brandon have been extradited along with the Team Rocket boss himself back to Kanto. As for Jesse, James, and Meowth..." Sorry, a second, a little bit. "Oh, did someone mention us?" said a womanly voice, almost on cue behind him, followed closely by a man and a feline Pokemon. "Yep, that's right, we're still here." "We would know if it's that the cops are gonna throw the book at us in questioning, but as it turns out, yes, a failure makes people that much more willing to look the other way." To this, Wobbuffet appeared beside him and gave a signature gesture in agreement. "Indeed," James followed up. "When we knew the boss, Giovanni, had gotten arrested himself, we were sure our lives as we knew it were over. But then it was as though an olive branch had descended from the heavens and gave us a second chance." "Wow," May said with wide eyes, albeit ignoring James' sudden attempt to wax poetic. "I guess Officer Jenny was able to pull through after all." "That she was," Jesse said with a clap, "and we couldn't be more grateful." The years she'd known them, May had never seen them so content. Maybe the fact that she no longer had to worry about Pikachu being snatched from Ash's clutches played a part in it, in addition to there no longer being a danger of being laughed at from above at the bottom of a pit. Even looking beyond that, though, there was a way they carried themselves that made it seem like there was little burden left for them to shoulder. There's no better evidence of this than their very clothes. Notably absent were the white Team Rocket uniforms that they had been forever known for, and in their place was strangely casual attire. Jesse was sporting a breathable blue jacket with short denim shorts. James, similar to Jesse, was wearing more modest shorts of his own that went down to his knees, as well as an orange tee that very well complemented his blue hair. "It's lavender!" Meowth was, well, still not really wearing anything, but he nevertheless had a sort of reformed air about him like the others. Could they really have turned over a new leaf after all? May thought to herself. She didn't much like to imagine the alternative, considering she was quickly taking a shine to their demeanor. So instead, she cast that thought aside, interested in their new style, and said, "Well, anyway, I love your new look. It's very fresh." The wardrobe compliment was taken positively by Jessie, especially. "Well," she said with a bashful giggle, "we figured that if you could mark a new milestone in your life with a new look, why couldn't we?" May instinctively touched her new green bandana and blushed at the idea that she may have had any sort of positive influence on someone who needed it the most. At the very least, we wanted something that didn't make us want to die of heat stroke in this tropical climate. Which made sense too in May's eyes. She then immediately laughed off the idea that she may have had anything to do with their change in wardrobe and went back to her meal, content with their company. Okay, you don't get that one either? So, it is a reference to... It's a reference to a book named, it's written by, it's a reference to a book by Douglas Adams of the same title, only with, Corphish, only with the word fish replaced by Corphish, of course. It's the fourth book of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, so. And also, he was sleep deprived from training and fighting for days on end. Also, it makes sense now that he's sleeping a lot. Yep, he had a lot of sleep debt accrued. For sure. On top of that. And you love the fourth wall break? Yes, thank you, Aiden. It's the same fourth wall break that he makes on... I actually copied that joke wholesale from the anime. I'm sure you probably remembered that as well, but I couldn't not do it. Especially after PikamasterADV was describing him as having blue hair all the time, I figured, you know what? How about we mix it up a little bit? You know? Okay, the book doesn't ring a bell, no pun intended, but so base to change it. Yeah! I mean, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I haven't read myself, but, you know, it has a lot of fans, indeed. It's almost like a... I don't know, I feel like it's one of those sacred texts of the internet, so to speak. Even though it was published in 1984. Before the internet was widespread. Oh, you don't remember that fourth wall break? It was like a conversation of sorts. I think it's like, you know, like Team Rocket were in the bushes planning something, and Meowth was like, "Don't worry, that pretty blue head of yours. I got a plan. It's lavender." You know, with the camera was focused on May's face, and James was off screen, and you just hear him say, "It's lavender," and it's like, it's. Oh my god, that stuck with me. Such a good moment. And I hope you get your reference to your no pun intended. Of course I do. Bravely Default, right? Of course I do. Of course I do. I love Bravely Default. It's a good game. It's a great... I mean, it's technically a Final Fantasy game. If you think about it. Has the Final Fantasy magic system. You know, has the naming conventions for spells. Which you probably noticed while I was playing Kingdom Hearts the other day. And, you know, you have 4 Warriors of Light traveling to crystals. So, yeah. So, you know, it's a great Final Fantasy game with time freezing mechanics and an awesome battle. Honestly, the battle system is awful. I love the Brave and Default system. It's so good. All right, anyway, enough talking about Bravely Default. Need to go back to the cartoon. Gosh dang it. Ugh. It was about an hour until everyone had eaten their fill, and after cleaning up, they went into the lobby to continue their individual conversations. Annabelle and a peculiarly shy Greta talked amongst themselves about whether the battle frontier could continue after what happened. Brock, Cindy, and Jessie explored the latter's newfound aspirations and what she and the others would do next. And James and Meowth simply left to take care of errands or whatever. May hoped they weren't actually going to give in to recidivism and, say, rob a bank, but she stopped herself from worrying about it too much. She then looked around to see what Ash was doing, and spotted him standing a fair distance from the pack. It looked as though he was simply watching them enjoy themselves, and yet sought solitude for himself. Something she found concerning, especially after realizing that he hadn't said much while he was eating. Like before at breakfast, she snuck up on him from behind and gave him a quick hug. It startled him at first, but he soon reciprocated with an embrace of his own. With everything behind them all May wanted to do was catch up with him in private and grill him on what happened while she was dead all that time. A few words into her selling the subject, however, it became obvious to her that Ash wasn't in a particularly talkative mood for some reason. In fact, he hadn't said a word after asking about Team Rocket at breakfast, and the prospect that something had changed within him worried the girl. Still concerned, she turned to face him and asked, "Ash, is everything alright?" It took a second for him to react to the stimulus, leading her to believe that he had momentarily been possessed by a slowpoke. "Yeah, I'm good," he said half-heartedly, barely making eye contact. Perhaps needless to say, she was completely unconvinced. "What's the matter? You know I can tell when you're feeling off." Ash sighed before hesitantly conceding. "Nothing gets by you, does it?" She was tempted to respond with only regarding you, but she wasn't particularly sure how receptive he'd be to tongue-in-cheek humor, so she shelved the quip's use for a later date. It was just as well, too, as the words began to flow from his mouth to finally break his long silence. She thought it best, therefore, to not interrupt him and risk derailing his train of thought. "I guess," he started slowly, to give himself extra time to choose his words. "I just feel guilty." "Oh? About what?" Ash choked, presumably by doing his best to hold back tears. "About everything. I feel guilty about almost losing you, about joining Giovanni, about my attempt to murder Scott and Team Rocket, and about how I almost attacked the rest of you." Noting his shaky voice, May made sure he was making eye contact, and sternly said, "Ash, it wasn't your fault. You didn't murder anyone." It still doesn't feel right, though. Maybe I didn't kill anyone, but I did intend to, and all in the name of revenge. Doesn't that make me just as bad as a murderer? "No," May answered resoundingly, refusing to even entertain the thought. "You're not a bad person, Ash. Far from it." He wasn't moved. "Why then?" he challenged. "Tell me right now why I shouldn't just be locked up in the same cell as Giovanni." She was taken aback at his tone, which had gained a sharpness that she was sure was more of a result of his fear of himself than anything truly adversarial. While she knew what she had said to be true, her confidence in expressing it believably came up a bit wanting. But even so, she answered, "I mean, remember things from your perspective. You were convinced that I was dead, and you became the angriest I've ever seen in my life. You took out your anger on the wrong people, yeah, but at the time, you were just working with the information you had. For all you knew, if you didn't do anything, someone else would have died." Ash paused for a moment to process her explanation. It looked like her words had some effect, since the trembling in his voice ceased, though he still avoided looking into the pure blue of her eyes, lest they be corrupted by the darkness that still tinged his. "So, do you still love me even though I did such awful things?" "Oh, stop it, Ash!" May snapped. "Yes, of course I love you! Nothing will ever change that in a million years!" He stopped for a bit to process once more what she had said, and with a sniffle, stepped up to her to give her another hug. "Thank you, May." May, blushing from the surprise, embraced him back. "Hey, anytime. Besides, in a roundabout way, I think I understand how you're feeling." "You do?" She nodded. "You weren't around to see this, thank goodness. But when we were headed to the dotted hole to get the sapphire before the brains did, I spotted Greta by the front and, well, beat her up." Ash quickly recoiled to face her, his eyes twisted into a look of shock. "You did what? Why?" May broke free from his embrace, turned around to avoid his gaze, and sighed. I was angry. There's really no other way for me to put it besides that I hated her for what she did to you. I mean, she took you away from me, Ash, so when I saw her defenseless, I let out everything. Jesse and James tried to stop me, and Greta was begging for me to stop, but I hated her so much that I wanted to kill her myself. Ash was silent. She couldn't see him, but she figured that if she looked the other way, she would have seen fear in his face or his jaw on the floor. And I only stopped because I remembered what I told Misty during what happened between us a while ago. That's when I realized that, in that moment, I was no better than Harley. I succumbed to my grudge and wanted revenge of my own. Reluctantly, she spun around to confirm that Ash indeed was looking kind of fearful. What I did was horrible, and I'll never forgive myself for it. Even after I told her I was sorry. With that in mind, Ash, do you think I'm a murderer? Ash, just as quickly as she did when their roles were reversed, gave her a resounding no himself. Why is that? Well, he said, trying to find his words. Because you felt remorse and wanted to make amends, I guess. I mean, sure, just about anyone who's ever killed someone could say the same, but maybe that's what separates us from cold-blooded killers. So if you feel I deserve a second chance, why don't you think you deserve one too? With that, Ash finally smiled, clearly not going to object. He leaned forward to give her a quick kiss on the cheek. You always know what to say, don't you? May giggled. Only on Fridays. Or whatever today is. I lost track. The couple then spent the next few minutes catching up on what the other had missed while they were apart. Ash expressed surprise at how miraculous it was that she managed to survive the explosion despite being knocked out for 4 days at a time without serious injuries. May expressed concern herself when she got him mentioning the time that Greta was roughing him up while he was chained to a wall, as well as what could only be described as a very unhealthy diet of ramen and ketchup. This style of conversation continued until Brock motioned them over to mingle. Ash, while still clearly hesitant due to his remorse of essentially holding him at gunpoint before, agreed. He squeezed May's hand for courage while she herded him over. He didn't talk much, she noted, but she knew he was still the Ash she loved. Still yet with a capacity for humanity, compassion, and laughing at horrible puns. You like how it's not only the title of the game, but also a character name. Wait, is that? Honestly, it's been like a decade since I played Bravely Default, so I should probably do another playthrough at some point. But it's a very long game. There's just so much in that game, man. It's crazy. Idia's father. Oh, okay, yeah, that's right. Yep, that makes sense. That makes sense. Okay, you'll have to forgive me because I am looking for something. Ah, here we go. Days passed, and then a week. For some, the novelty of the tropical weather had begun to dull, and it wasn't long until Meowth and Cindy, two individuals who had unexpectedly hit it off and become fast friends over the past few days, complained to the others that they wanted to return to the more temperate climate they already made a home in. Others, like Ash and May, strongly disagreed with the sentiment, and vowed to make up even more of the vacation time they had lost, much to the others' chagrin. Each day, they'd leave the Pokemon Center to pick an activity or point of interest they wanted to investigate, and they'd go and spend some time alone there, sometimes with their Pokemon, sometimes without. One such day, they hiked back up Mount Ember to be patrons of the hot springs again, which they enjoyed immensely. The piping hot water made it all the more evident just how hard May worked herself over a week prior. The muscles in her legs had only begun to heal, and some residual pain that she hadn't even realized was still there had dissolved in the bath. Sometime afterwards, Ash was antsy to get back to training, which provided May the most confidence that he was beginning to feel better again. She insisted she join him, if only to give her new Ho-Oh a test drive. He accepted her challenge with zeal, although Pikachu wasn't so enthused to be battling another legendary Pokemon so soon. One hot light show later, she and Ash agreed to see if they could scrounge up some more ice cream in town. Lots of people were making berth at the docks each day, so it was only a matter of time when that particular industry would have replanted its foothold there. Sure enough, on their way back to the Pokemon Center, the ice cream stall they patronized earlier was manned once more, and so they were able to stave off heat exhaustion for another day. This chain of events tended to repeat itself every other day, and yet the repetition didn't bother them so much. The streak was broken, however, when Ash, all of a sudden, one morning, told her he needed to spend the day in town on an errand. She didn't think much of it, and then proceeded to spend the rest of the day with the others, whose dwindling patience with the sameness of it all was far more apparent than hers. The talks continued until, well, May started to grow a bit weary herself. It just wasn't the same without Ash there. But after a while, she decided to make do with going into town on her lonesome and take care of an errand she had been meaning to get to herself. A few hours later, when she returned, she immediately made her way back to the dining hall to find the others finishing their own meal, and had been told that she just missed Ash, who wasn't with them. Apparently, he was so tired that he made his way back to the room and went to sleep. Poor Ash must have run himself ragged all day, she thought to herself as she poured herself a bowl of stew before joining in on their conversation. It, like their talks earlier in the day, weren't anything special. Just the weather, the cute gift shop they found in town that day, or some such. May didn't have much to say, however, so after finishing her meal, she bid the others a good night and tracked Ash down. Sure enough, opening the door, the lights were off, and Ash and Pikachu were fast asleep on one of the bottom bunks. She used all her willpower to not squeal at the display of cuteness, and quietly tiptoed to the shower and changed into her pajama shirt. When she was sure she didn't wake them up, she tiptoed back over to the bedside, climbed into bed with them, and carefully wrapped her arm around him. The air conditioning was set to a particularly chilly setting that night, so she was amazed that he was able to fall asleep without any covers. It was so cold, she began to shiver, but she didn't want to climb under the sheets and disturb his slumber. Plus, after a while, she had grown acclimated, and Ash's warmth was itself a wonderful shield against the windy AC unit. The warmth, the sense of the body wash he was finally able to use, the softness of his clothes. All of it gave her the sense of security she was missing all that time. Her eyes slowly drooped shut, and then she could finally dive headfirst into warm dreams of her own. Go on, Dad. Here goes the pressure. I'm sorry, Aiden. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But it is a shipping fan. It is a shipping fic. I'm kind of, I was kind of obligated to do so. The next day, May awoke to find she was now the only occupant of the bed. The air conditioning had switched off, perhaps to save power, and she felt her hair had grown sticky overnight from the humidity. Disgusted, she climbed out of bed and rushed into the shower, spending a good few minutes scrubbing and remedying the grievances with her hygiene. From there, she got dressed into her signature green outfit once more, and dried her hair until it got the right degree of softness that she was satisfied with. Taking a moment to appreciate her handiwork, she left the room and made her way once more to the dining hall, where she saw Ash and Scott, of all people, having what seemed to be a somewhat difficult conversation. "It was how much?" Ash just exclaimed with his hands in his hair, almost looking for a moment like he was going to pull it out. Scott nervously chuckled with a hand held behind his head. "Yeah, I know. It wasn't cheap. I understand how you're feeling at the time, but apologies don't pay mortgages. If they did, I'd be a real estate mogul by now." May, worried that something was wrong, approached the pair. "Ash, what's going on?" Ash, startled, turned to see his girlfriend and grimaced. Happy to see her, surely, but not enough to eliminate his worries. "We're having a discussion on how we're going to pay for Scott's house." "Oh, the one that you burned down?" He flinched and averted his eyes in shame, not wishing desperately he still had a hat to hide under. You don't have to say it so directly like that. Scott found his display of vulnerability amusing, but didn't really press hard, instead raising his hands in an attempt to diffuse the tension. No, I'm not trying to strong-arm you into just paying out the nose, Ash. That would be madness, not to mention a financial dead end anyway. Oh, sure, I gotcha, Ash replied, desperately trying to not give the impression that he was outraged at the audacity or the like. I just wonder how anyone could possibly get the money to pay for all that. I mean, it wasn't just the house. I bet you had a lot of expensive stuff inside, too. That and a number of keepsakes I could never put a price tag on, Scott said with a sad sigh. But hey, I'm not greedy or vindictive or anything like that. Again, I completely understand why you would try to off me, and if I'll be honest, it's not like I was blameless either. We were all manipulated by Giovanni. Sorry. I need a drink. Oh, that's better. And you're becoming a masochist for being here. No, you're not a masochist, you're cool! You're awesome. It's such a good story. I feel so good hearing this! I mean, it's not completely my story. The majority is PikamasterADV's story, but I did write the last few chapters. And I'm reading including the one that I'm reading right now, so it kind of feels like it's partially mine. In a sentence. And water. There's no water here. I tried to tell you, we're gonna get out of here. You're doing this wrong. We're going to get out. What kind of place is this? Oh, look at that. You got me to do a Patrick impression without the redeem. Congratulations. Okay, I actually lost my place. Where was I? Ah, yes. We were all manipulated by Giovanni. Well, still, Ash said, still shamefully looking at the very interesting shade of charcoal his shoes had recently gained. I really do want to make up for what I did to you. I'm just not sure how I can do that. Being a Pokemon trainer isn't the best paying job out there, you know? Oh, believe you me, I know. I wouldn't have needed to ask for a home loan for Team Rocket if the battle payouts and sponsorships were that lucrative. So what can I do? If I can't pay you back with money, what? Scott paused for a moment. It was hard to get a good reading of him with his eyes behind his sunglasses, but it was clear that he was having difficulty coming up with a particularly good solution himself. May watched with bated breath as the two struggled to put their heads together, and she even took a moment to try to come up with an idea of her own, although it didn't take long for her to realize that she didn't know much about making money, instead having had to rely on others for that sort of thing in the past. After a few minutes of thinking, however, Scott finally broke the silence with a finger snap. Alright, so the biggest reason why this is so difficult is because I don't want to get in the way of your Pokemon journey. You were actually planning on competing in another Pokemon League for this upcoming year, right? Yes, that's right. So, the way I see it, that leaves us with two options. One, you can continue your previous plans and compete in another Pokemon League. Sinnoh's is looking quite promising this year, by the way. And use your winnings to pay towards the reparations and put in a good work to get more sponsors to check out the Battle Frontier. Or two, you could stay here in Kanto and work for me as a Frontier Brain until you've earned enough to help pay off the debt. Ash hesitated to say anything. He only got as far as opening his mouth, but no sound came out of it. He looked around the room, first at May, then at Pikachu, to see if they would give him some sort of guidance. But he stumbled across his words when it was clear no one would come to his aid. From May's perspective, neither option seemed ideal. Having to stay in Kanto for who knows how long was the obvious drawback to the latter option, but having no access to winnings for a year sounded completely unsustainable. It was hard enough for her to get by competing only in contests, and that was with Brock propping the whole group up on top of whatever meager winnings they could get. Ash wasn't exactly rolling in bills when he competed. With even that mode of revenue gone, how could they live? A couple of minutes passed without Ash being able to say much. Only when he closed his eyes and meditated for a bit did he finally resolve to answer. Please, give me a while to think about this. I want to make sure I make the best decision I can. Scott didn't react too negatively to Ash's request by the looks of it. Instead of pressing for an answer, he smiled and said, Sure, there's no need to rush. I'll be here on one island for another few days before I need to deal with legal matters on the mainland, so I'll just hang tight until then. Ash exhaled in slight relief before thanking him. Scott then simply reciprocated with an any time before quickly traipsing back to the lobby to take a phone call. A somewhat heated one regarding Battle Frontier liabilities by the sounds of it. Despite his well-collected attitude, it was clear that whatever he and his interlocutor had to discuss weighed heavily on him, and the constant pacing back and forth gave May so much anxiety that she had to look away. In doing so, she caught Ash staring into space again. No doubt the hard choice he had to make gave him a lot to think about as well. Moreover, considering how scared it was making her feel, she could only imagine how terrified he was, especially considering he had to be the one to pull the lever himself. She desperately wanted to help, but she despised the only advice she could come up with, which ended up being no different than the two choices he was presented with already. It wasn't long until she acknowledged that her input would be useless, so instead of racking her brain further, she gently tugged his shirt to get his attention. Hey, she said, if you're hungry, I can grab you some breakfast if you want. Practically on cue, Ash's stomach responded with a loud growl that almost drew eyes from a few nearby trainers who were already dining. His face flushing red, he laughed in an attempt to mask the sound. Yeah, that sounds good to me. Without a word, May went over to the buffet section and grabbed a couple of plates, piling on as much food as she felt they could eat. At least as much as she felt they could get away with without needing to pay. After a couple minutes of scooping rice, noodles, and an assortment of meats, she returned with what could only be described as a mini feast for two. The couple dug in as soon as they were both seated, and for the next half hour or so, they ate in relative silence. The weight of uncertainty in their future complemented sourly with the heaviness of the meal they forcefully fed to themselves. If you could actually win a Pokemon League, it would be. Yeah, it would be. It would be. For sure. It really would be. For sure. But that's also far from guaranteed, you know. And and according to you, he got robbed by someone using legendaries, which is kind of dumb, NGL. You didn't even see a chat message? It was actually flagged automatically. So it didn't actually show up in chat, so. Twitch is getting better at, like, detecting whether someone's, like, a ban evader, like a likely ban evader. Oh, he got fondled, bro, by a Darkrai and a Latios. Why? Why? The Darkrai used Dark Void. A move so busted they had to nerf. And it's never been the same since. Yeah, it is a thing. It's kind of new. It's not really. I don't think it's not really been out for too long. Maybe a couple months, maybe. Plus, he had his strongest team ever up to that point, and that was the only way he'd lose. I mean, yeah, it's still cringe, though. You know, playing meta. Like, Ash was nice enough not to bring Ubers to a fight. But his team didn't consist of Ubers, did it? Or did it? I don't know. But a Darkrai and a Latios? Really? Really? I actually don't know the Smogon tier list at the time, but really? Like, come on. Anyway. Eventually, a couple more days passed, and May found herself once again the lone occupant of her bed. After rubbing her eyes clean, she curled to her side and yawned, lamenting the insomnia she had been cursed with ever since Ash's discussion with Scott. She sniffed and caught the subtle waft of Ash's scent that was fading by the minute before clutching the wrinkled comforter and smothering it in her face. She and Ash didn't speak much after dinner a couple days prior, nor did she even see him much beyond breakfast and dinner. She got the impression that maybe he was still under a lot of pressure to come up with a decision and simply wanted some alone time to figure it out. Or maybe he had already come to a decision and was avoiding her because he was afraid she wouldn't like the answer? Regardless of his intentions, the end result was the same. She was afflicted with a sense of restlessness that even constant pacing couldn't remedy. She lost track of whether it was 15 minutes or 40 before she groggily climbed out of bed and stalked her way to the bathroom to shower and brush, taking care to not slip on the wet floor, evidence that Ash had already done his business while she slept. She turned the valve and waited for the water to warm up before slipping in, all the while running through the same thoughts that had kept her up at night. Did he make his decision already? She thought as she lathered soap in her hands. Is he really avoiding me? Or does he really just need alone time? She yelped when a rogue stream of shampoo suds dripped into her eyes and she clutched her face as they burned. For that matter, why am I so scared? Will I have to give up my dream of being a coordinator? What if he insists I pursue my dream while he stays in Kanto? Will we even be able to stay together regardless of what he chooses? Her feet required her attention next, and then her arms. It almost feels like no matter what I do, he'll always be out of my reach. It's almost like we'll never have enough time. Satisfied with her hot soap, she shut off the valve and stood in the cell for a moment to let the excess water run off before stepping out and fetching her towel and clothes. Never have enough time. After a few minutes of drying her hair and getting dressed, she was finally ready to greet the day once more. But she hesitated after eyeing the door handle, as though she was afraid it was hooked up to an electrical outlet. She couldn't be sure, but it was like she was simply afraid to do anything, in the hopes that doing nothing would let her keep things just as the way they were. Maybe if I just stay in my room forever, I'll never have to say goodbye. She knew, however, that was simply wishful thinking, based on nothing but cowardice, regardless of how often she said it to herself. She broke through what felt to be a strong river current pushing her back, and forced her hand to reach the knob and turn it. As soon as she opened the door a crack, though, a glimpse of folded white paper caught the corner of her eye, resting between the doorframe and her shoe. Curious, she picked it up and unfolded it, and, sure enough, the chicken scratch matched Ash's handwriting. May, it began. Meet me on Treasure Beach tonight at 7. I need to tell you something. The note had no closing signature, not that it needed one, but in its place was a crudely drawn heart filled in with scrapes from a blue ballpoint pen that was clearly almost out of ink. She sighed and pocketed the note, appreciating the effort at romance, but none too happy with the ambiguous way it ended. Soon, like clockwork, her stomach called out for breakfast as she walked out down the hall towards the dining area. At least she had something pleasant she could look forward to. Brock, Cindy, Greta, and Annabelle were already seated at a table watching a particularly tenacious Pikachu wrestling with a stubborn bottle of ketchup. After gathering her feast for the morning, she sat herself down next to Brock and across from Greta and took a moment of her own to see who was winning the fight. It was the ketchup bottle, of course, but it was a close match. Noticing the new guest, Brock glanced over at the downtrodden girl. Hey, May, are you alright? Your eyes are red. May wasn't surprised, although she couldn't tell whether it was more due to her crying earlier or the shampoo. Embarrassed, she simply went with the latter explanation and hoped no one else would press her. They didn't, thank goodness. Have you seen Ash around this morning? Annabelle asked as she bit into some toast. Greta, for some reason, grew flustered upon hearing her. Oish, Annie! Are you still worried about him? No, not in that way. I just seriously haven't seen him in a long time, and it's weird to see that he's not here with you. Nope, I haven't, May replied bluntly. Only got this note from him, which she held out, only to have it immediately swiped away by Greta. She scanned it over for a couple seconds, before dismissively handing it back to May in a huff. Yikes, talk about opaque. Only giving you a time and location without any indication at all of what he wants to talk about? What's he thinking? I mean, he's probably thinking about a lot, Brock said sagely. He told me about his predicament with Scott, and I'll admit, it sounds like a pretty serious dilemma. Man, why can't Scott just forgive Ash anyway? Cindy whined. I wanted to watch him compete in the Sinnoh League. Pikachu briefly stopped attacking the bottle to voice agreement before going ham at it again. Greta sighed as the worry-filled atmosphere dragged her down. It's not so simple, kid. Adults need to accept the consequences of the choices they make, and I know he realizes this. Oh yeah, but still. Could this really mean no more competing if he can't afford to travel? That's possible, Annabelle sadly said with a nod. And he may find life as a frontier brain to be too stagnant and monotonous without new sights and Pokemon to see. So it's anyone's wager at this point. He must have picked something, though, Greta said between bites of her breakfast. After all, Scott told us today is their last day before they're needed back in Kanto. Ah, doy! Annabelle exclaimed, pounding her forehead. I completely forgot about that! And just like that, my morning is in the pits. Brock chuckled. What timing? I'm needed back in Pewter City this week too, so today will also be my last day. Cindy pounded the table in shock, prompting the silverware to jingle like wind chimes. No way! We're leaving? Yep, I'm afraid so. Family matters and all that. Also, I can't in good conscience leave you unattended. Rain must be worried sick about you by now. Yeah, you're telling me. If I miss just one night without calling her, she becomes a nervous wreck. And that's without mentioning all the life and death stuff that's happened. A lump had formed in May's throat from Brock's news, and so the food in her mouth fought back against it as she loudly swallowed, alerting the rest of them that she had been quiet for the past few minutes. What does this mean for me and Ash? Brock rubbed his chin for a moment and thought before responding. It's up to you two, I guess. I can't force you to come with us, after all. Depending on what he chooses, it may be some time before we see each other again. Oh, was all May could say before getting back to her food in silence. Familiar words filled her head again as she eyed her half-eaten eggs. Never have enough time. She had a bit of a start, however, when she felt a strong clap on her shoulder. Don't worry, May, Brock said with conviction. No matter what happens, we'll get through this. Everything will be fine. May wasn't too sure, especially with such scarce details, but even so, she greatly appreciated the shift in tone and the boost in confidence. Yeah, what's the worst that could happen? She thought with the same sort of conviction that Brock showed her. I'll trust Ash. What more can I do? May's spirits considerably raised, she finished her meal with gusto, which elicited a pleasantly surprised look from the others, who had just been considerably more morose regarding their itinerary. Despite this, they had another decent meal and pleasant conversation about this and that, and eventually they were able to completely distract themselves from the troubles that still ailed them. And so, with her stomach full and her mind less burdened by her problems, May turned her focus less to what Ash is planning on telling her, and more on her newfound desire to catch up on sleep to prepare for her encounter later that evening. And as the Frontier Brain, Annabelle will always be near eyes emoji. True, but don't put that evil on me, Aiden. Don't put that evil on me! Anyway. The sun had long set by the time May's boat reached the shore of Treasure Beach. Her short nap nearly turned into hibernation, but thanks to her diligence to actually set an alarm, she was able to freshen up a bit, go out to rent some sort of motorboat, and then embark a bit before the clock struck 6:30, albeit in near darkness. It took around 20 minutes or so to reach the other end of the bay, with nothing but the light from a near half moon to guide her. And with nothing but the light from a near half moon to guide her, she grew fearful that maybe she had turned at an off angle midway and was headed straight out to sea. Fortunately, she hadn't, and before long, the white sand from the shore glistened brightly enough to beckon her closer without any cause for worry. Looking even closer, though, she caught a dim outline of a large black pyramid. The battle pyramid, by the looks of it, with its apex flattened. Was Brandon freed after all? Perhaps maybe that wasn't Ash's handwriting, but his all along? She clapped her face to beat out the paranoia that had begun to make her jumpier than a caffeine IV drip. No, she knew that it had to be Ash who led her here, and everything was going to be alright. Right? She nearly tripped as she jumped out of the boat and set the anchor, fortunately catching herself in time before belly flopping right into the shallows. More care and attention went into her balance as she waded through ankle-deep water and finally reached dry land. She looked ahead and saw that the entrance to the battle pyramid was already open. Poorly lit, but open, nonetheless, and walked over somewhat cautiously. The colossus of a facility dwarfed the girl as she approached, and she was almost frozen in place from the grandeur of its sheer size. However, she quickly recommitted her focus ahead and walked through the entrance and into the dimly lit corridor. Still no sign of Ash. She wasn't sure if she was supposed to wait for him or if she was supposed to find him. Even though it was only a few minutes, granted, she grew impatient waiting there and thought, "All right, I'll find you then. What better way to do so than to go up?" She soon came to realize that it wasn't at all that straightforward to figure out where she had to go, to even go up. Like the battle fortress, the layout was consistent and symmetrical enough, but each hall only led her deeper in instead of further up. There were no stairs, at least not from what she could see, and her memory of the last time she was there was so useless in the dark that she couldn't come to rely on it for navigation. So she thought the best solution would be to brute force it by simply riding the right wall until she found something promising. Ugh. It did work, in all honesty, but it must have taken up all the spare time she had, and then some. Maybe it was 7:15 by then? Ash had to have been getting worried. At least he wouldn't have had to wait for long, since she did find an elevator. Just turns out it was in the very center, which made enough sense. From then, it was just smooth sailing to the top. After a couple more minutes, and dozens of floors later, there was finally a loud ding, indicating the final floor was reached. The elevator doors opened, and through them, they found Ash leaning forward against the guard railing, probably simply appreciating the sight. Slowly, quietly, she approached before she, too, was at the railing and could see the wondrous sight below for herself. Across the bay was a collection of various lights from one island, twinkling in the distance and flickering on as more and more people retired to their rooms for the evening. The streets illuminated various colors from the electronic billboards and the streetlights overhead, sharply contrasted with the matte lighting from the alleys and the surrounding water, giving it the impression of an imitation of the cosmos. Looking to her left made the contrast that much starker, as the natural lighting from the moon and stars filtered from above, and bounced off the gentle waves licking the shoreline below. It was as though there were two skies, and she only had to glance one way or another if she wanted to taste any one flavor anew. Eventually, May turned to her right to face the boy beside her. Unlike the state of him from about a week ago, his clothes looked to be patched up and ready for more battles. He looked clean, he smelled clean, and the look on his face was not one of boundless rage, but one of warmth. "Beautiful night, huh?" he asked, still keeping his gaze downward. "Yeah," May replied softly. "It sure is." The two returned to silence for a moment to appreciate that very night just a little bit more. There was no awkwardness between them. The night air, humid yet not too warm, only gave May more of a listless desire to continue watching the scene before her like a goddess from on high. She knew it couldn't last forever, but it was something she could at least make last for a moment longer. "You know," Ash said, breaking the silence, "it's pretty crazy to think of everything that had to happen to get us to this point. Don't you think?" May giggled in agreement. "If you think about it, it's almost like the universe was going to go elsewhere with our lives. I mean, I started out being afraid around Pokemon, but I got through my fear and became a coordinator. And I have to admit, I started out interested in you, but if you hadn't made your feelings clear to me, it's possible we would have parted ways after the Battle Frontier and never even had this wild vacation in the Sevii Islands. And none of that may have happened if it weren't for Pikachu destroying my bike." Ash laughed when the memory returned to him. "Yep, but it still did. Everything that happened still got us just a little bit closer to where we are now. Scared to think about what would have happened if even one of those things didn't happen, but then I remember the present day. And just think! You completed your Battle Frontier challenge!" With a grin, he held his hand to the back of his head and looked away, bashful. Yeah, but really, I'd have never gotten that far if it weren't for you." May was taken aback, partially by the strange sense of familiarity she got from the subject. Déjà vu, perhaps? Something told her he was going to say something like that, but she figured she'd humor him a bit regardless. "Oh, really? Why do you say that?" "Well,
Who are you people?
Oh, hello. Hello there, Creative Garden. Thank you for the raid. What were you up to?" "Aiden, may we have a shout out for our fine guest?" "Oh, you were doing writing and reading yourself. Were you doing the writing part or the reading part? Specifically. What were you up to?" And also, Nash rocks up with like overused/underused mons, and Bro rocks up with Uber's high tier overused team, and only saw 2 mons, so who knows who else he had. Yeah, who knows what else he had. Tonight was a reading stream. Thursday we'll be writing. Ooh, that's so cool. What were you reading, and what do you write? Out of curiosity. As you've probably no doubt surmised, this is also a writing and reading stream. So this is this entire thing is a fanfic written by PikamasterADV. So it's a pretty old one. It's nearly 2 decades old, if you can believe it. It was left unfinished, but then I had the motivation to finish it myself, and we are reading the final chapter of that attempt. And we are getting very close to the end. But we're having a good time. I'm trying to read somewhat slowly to like absorb everything, to make it last longer. You know, and I think I'm succeeding because I'm running on 3 hours here. On Mondays, you read from the King Raven trilogy by Stephen Lawhead, and we're on book 2 now. Nice, okay. I'd not heard of that trilogy, but is it, I wonder what genre it is. Oh, it's a retelling of the Robin Hood story. Gotcha, okay. So, it's kind of like, I mean, I don't want to say fantasy, because, I mean, Robin Hood is, you know, kind of rooted, at least the mythos of Robin Hood in many ways is rooted in, like, a lot of, like, simply, like, European, like, sort of, like, Middle Ages-esque sort of events. That could very easily be applied to the present day, too, with modern sensibilities for certain things, but Hey, we like the medieval. We like the medieval ones, you know. I hope you're enjoying it so far. It does sound interesting. And I must ask what you write as well, because yeah, so I guess going back to what I was getting at before, so this is a shipping fanfiction. A Pokemon one. And yeah, so you could probably guess that I like romance fanfiction. Yep, it's set in Wales instead of England, and during the time of William the Red instead of Richard the Lionheart. Okay. Huh. So I imagine then that there would be some events that would have played out differently then, right? Like, I have to admit that my history of monarchies in the British Isles, or the Great Britain, or I guess Great Britain as a whole, are lacking, or like is lacking. I'm not the biggest history buff myself, although I do love history. It's like, it's not my strongest subject. I'm a software engineer by trade, so. Man, that sounds interesting. That sounds interesting, though. I wonder how much it diverges. I imagine it would have to diverge in some interesting ways. It's a little more rugged geography than England, and a little more commentary on invaders, as opposed to a tyrannical ruler who has been there for years. Okay, I see. I see. So, because, I mean, like, in the traditional story, you have Prince John, who is, as you said, a tyrant, And, kind of, like, weaponizes the police to do his bidding. Hello, Sheriff of Nottingham. Which is a fun game, by the way. I don't know if anyone's played it, but it's a fun, like, social deduction game, I think? Kinda social deduction? The author has an explanation in the end of book 1 telling about what led him to change the time and setting. Oh, that's super cool, actually. I love it when people, like, take liberties with, like, certain things. Like, this is the way public domain was meant to be played, Like, it was made to be remixed. Like, you have Robin Hood being in public domain and just changing it around to, like, play with it, and see what else happens. And, well, honestly, it's pretty sweet, and it's also why copyright law should be changed to be what it was before Disney came in and ruined everything. If you know what I mean. And I say that knowing fully well that I am playing music from a series that is owned by Disney, but hey. Anyway, I hope you had a great stream, and I thank you for rating mine. We are getting close to the end. So let's finish this off, shall we? I know Aiden's getting antsy just thinking about how it's gonna end. Who else but Disney, am I right? Yeah, you're not wrong, Aiden. You're not wrong. You are not wrong. All right. Well, as Patchy the Pirate once said, back to the cartoon. May was taken aback, partially by the strange. Actually, no. Let me back up a little bit more. And just think, May said, you completed your Battle Frontier challenge. With a grin, he held his hand to the back of his head and looked away, bashful. Yeah, but really, I'd never have gotten it that far if it weren't for you. May was taken aback, partially by the sense of familiarity she got from the subject. And thank you for the follow, Creative Garden. I appreciate it. I appreciate you. Deja vu, perhaps? Something told her he was going to say something like that, but she figured she'd humor him a bit regardless. Oh, really? Why do you say that? Well, he began, you were there for me during my worst moments. Back when I was possessed, when I had almost drowned in the sea temple, when I was down on my luck in battles, when I was hurt from Swallow saving us, and, well, when I was possessed again. You were always there to pick me back up somehow, or even save me outright. If you weren't there, I'm not sure if I'd even still be here. Just returning the favor, May said, flushing red in embarrassment. You've done your fair share of helping me. I've lost count of how many times you were supportive of me when things didn't go my way in contests, you know? I'd say we complement each other pretty well. Then it was Ash's turn to blush to such a hue of red that it was even noticeable to May in the dim lighting. He fidgeted his hands and fumbled his way into his right pocket and almost looked like he was going to drop whatever it was he was pulling out. But fortunately, he caught it before it was flung into a shadowy grave down below. Yeah. He stuttered. So well, in fact, that I think you should have this. He handed something in front of her, and what it was made her eyes grow to the size of saucers. It was a ruby, roughly the size of his thumb, encased in a silver frame, and bound to a silvery chain with links so small and numerous they melted in his hand. May's heart skipped a beat, and she struggled to get the words out. Ash, are you asking me to... Asking you to do what? Marry you? Ash recoiled, almost dropping the pendant. What? No, we're way too young for that! Then relief washed over her heart slowing down to a more manageable tempo. Oh, good, she said with a loud exhale. You had me going for a minute there. I'm sorry. I just found this ruby when we were on Mount Ember and thought that you'd like it if I took it to a jeweler on the island. You did express interest in a ruby necklace on our way to Mount Ember, after all. Do you like it? May carefully picked up the pendant and ran her fingers through the silky chain, appreciating the gem's luster and delicate cuts before looping it around and letting it adorn her neck. Ash, this is beautiful! I had no idea you had such a mind for gifts! He scratched the back of his head, not sure how to acknowledge that compliment beyond an embarrassed laugh. May took a couple seconds to pose and show off her new jewelry, and the sight of her being so happy almost brought a tear to his eye. It looks very good on you. Oh, why, thank you, she responded with a graceful bow. Before remembering something she almost forgot after being in the moment. You know, it's funny. She zipped open her pack and rummaged through her things. Pokeballs, a ribbon case, the note from earlier, to find what it was that she herself had tasked with giving him. Great minds think alike! Ash's mouth dropped at the sight of her gift. A silver necklace decorated with bits of seashells, with a cut sapphire fitted in the middle. His clumsy finger twitches almost knocked it out of her hands, prompting an eye roll for May, but eventually, he too was able to fit his hand through it and wear it on his wrist. This also looks awesome, he exclaimed, still eyeing the gem with profound satisfaction. Where'd you find it? Well, when the rest of us were at the dotted hole to keep the brains from getting the sapphire, I just found it lying around. I didn't know what I would do with it until later, but when I had enough time to run errands without you there to notice, I took my opportunity to get you something surprising. Wow, great minds really do think alike. May then slowly inched closer to him, half slyly, half shyly, with a smile on her face. Oh, this is very sweet. Thank you, Ash. And then it was Ash's turn for deja vu. He knew what he had to do, or rather, what she was egging him on to do, for it was weeks ago when he had concocted that very same scenario whole cloth in his head. Silly as he thought it was at first. Then again, he knew what he was going for since the beginning,
having clearly borrowed the battle pyramid just for that view, and scheduled it just for that time in a place just right to sightsee. Slowly and gently, he grabbed her right hand with his braceleted left. He brought it up closer to him, with his heart pounding all the while with such ferocity he was sure she would hear it over the sound of the breeze. Whether she did or not in reality was anyone's guess, but she didn't comment on it anyway, and let him continue to pull it further and further. And finally, he brought the back of her hand to his mouth and gently pressed his lips against it. The quick, subtle sensation tickled her, eliciting an involuntary giggle. "You are quite the gentleman, Mr. Ketchum," she said with a small curtsy. Before he could really process what she was doing, she inched closer and then swiftly stole a kiss on his cheek. Shocked, Ash's skin and bone petrified for a mere couple seconds before thawing. May giggled again at his penchant for becoming flustered so easily, although deep down she wholeheartedly appreciated his expression of respect for her boundaries, especially after considering how severely they were violated before. "It's all right, Ash," she said softly, inching even closer. "Everything is okay." To which he then smiled and closed his eyes. That was her cue. She closed the distance further before her lips and his were just centimeters apart. She froze for a second to observe his reaction, and saw to her delight that his eyes were still closed and his smile had already changed to a pucker. And then, the moment their lips finally touched, all reality around them dissolved to nothing, and their feet were no longer on the ground. They were flying through the sky, or perhaps swimming in the inky depths of the moonlit bay, and their path curved through the clouds or the shallows as their kiss grew deeper. It wasn't hot in the sky, nor cold in the water in and of itself. Bumps on her skin formed only from the further intensifying heat of the moment, but she shivered from neither cold nor fear, nor the wind nor water rushing past her ears. There was nothing to fear any longer. Their kiss continued for a good couple of minutes before it broke, and with it, the fantasy that they found themselves submerged in. Their feet were back onto the battle pyramid, and the lighting from both the stars, moon, and the word below faded back into existence. May's goosebumps from the moment were the only evidence that remained of her brief foray into a world beyond. Both were disappointed the kiss went as soon as it came, but neither of them said a word, and, in fact, were quite happy enough to embrace to save off the cool wind that had returned when they did. Ash's arms wrapped around her from behind, and from there they went back to their front row seats, appreciating the townsfolk returning to their homes and preparing for a new day. "I think I made my decision," Ash said, after a few minutes of just watching the view. Just like that, May's anxiety from the days before returned. "You did?" It took all her willpower to hide the fact that she wanted to shiver, but she didn't want to risk scaring him either. "Yeah, it was part of the reason why I brought you here, actually." She figured there had to be an additional catch to such a romantic night. Gulping, and her heart beginning to pound like a drum in her chest, she followed up with, "And what did you decide?" "I decided," he said, before gulping for himself, "to take up Scott's offer of becoming a frontier brain." May froze in place, afraid that moving an inch to the left or right would cause Ash to let go and run away. She was afraid of hearing that particular decision, and more than that, she was surprised. "Oh, I see. I would have thought you'd want to continue your journey to another region and compete in another league." "And I do want that. There's so many new Pokemon that I haven't seen, and I know I have a bunch left to learn as a trainer before I can be the best. Still, no matter how much I wish for it, it doesn't change the fact that a frontier brain does get paid more than if I were to just compete. So I figured that I'll be able to get back to doing what I love most more quickly if I went with this." May was silent, but not out of disappointment, really. His logic makes sense to her, and she liked the idea of him being able to travel again. And with a guilt-free conscience and a debt-free wallet on top of that. "Is that okay, May?" honestly, I'm scared you might not like it, since I know how important it is for you to compete in contests. I mean, yeah, that's true, May replied. If I don't do that, then competing in the Grand Festival is only a pipe dream at this point. Ash's teeth started chattering, which surprised her so much she began to laugh. But you know, I think I could get away with sticking around in Kanto. Who's to say I can't practice with you and fly out to contests? I can still get ribbons that way and then compete in the Grand Festival just the same, right? I mean, if we can get you transportation, okay. I'm not entirely sure how it'll work, though. Maybe if Scott lets me borrow the battle pyramid? She turned in his arms and smiled at him. Oh, you worry too much. Rich, of course, coming from someone who had just been worried to death about his decision herself. Although she was glad Ash didn't have the courage to call her out on it. We'll make it work. I'm scared too, but where there's a will, there's a way, right? I refuse to give up on my dream, but I love you too much to just leave in pursuit of that. So we'll make it work. I just know it. Ash mouthed her name in surprise, but no sound came out. He clearly hadn't realized just how much his outward resolve had a tendency to rub off on other people, especially her. In that moment, however, perhaps he finally did have an idea just how much alike they both had become just by being around each other so much. It was rather intoxicating, he had to admit. Ash couldn't help but laugh himself and just vent the rest of anxiety out of his system. Okay, I believe you, he said, embracing the weight of relief that took his place. Kingdom Hearts fans should be laughing at that part. You're right. I know we can make this work. I love you too much not to myself. Then let's make it work, boyfriend, she playfully replied with a wink before burying her face into his chest. Ash simply tightened his embrace around her and didn't say anything. Part of him took time to run over a few additional scenarios regarding how they were exactly going to make the whole affair work. But the second part was screaming at the first part to slow down and just enjoy the moment for now. May, on the other hand, was entirely in the moment. Her shivers completely ceased, and in their place was a feeling of warmth and comfort, not unlike the kind one would get from a blanket in front of a campfire. There were no worries left for her to ponder, as in her mind, they were all resolved, or if not resolved, she had the utmost confidence they would be. It was evidence to both of them that the future itself was the final frontier left unexplored. But May knew even then, that together with Ash, it need not terrify her. And that is the end of the Maze Crush saga. That is... You did not expect that ending? So, here's my thought process to why I ended it this way. I mean, on the one hand, he had to... Well, first and foremost, he did have to face the consequences of his actions from before. Like... PikamasterADV was probably a little bit more fast and loose with, the fact that this is the Pokemon universe, and so, like... resolutions can, like, come and go, just by Harley being blasted off, you know? Even though he did deserve worse. Yes, I agree with you on that. But I was like, no, screw that. Reality needs to ensue here. Especially considering how much more serious the stakes were, you know? And, this is a conversation that they had before, earlier, you know? Like, kind of related to, like, that conversation they had back in Pallet Town at the beginning of Final Frontier, remember? Where they talked about, or at least where Ash talked about, like, I'm afraid, like, he was afraid that he was just gonna screw up so badly that she wouldn't love him anymore. You know? And, well, he does exactly the thing that he would be afraid would have her, not love him anymore, you know?
And she did have to grapple with that reality herself before she was like, before she said to herself, well, there's darkness in anyone, and I shouldn't give up on him, you know? And hey, come on, real life is rarely that smooth, you know? So yeah, Ash does have to face consequences for his actions, and that did set up the nice little added benefit of making it so that, okay, well, this presents conflict, because, well, Ash and May are also concerned about what would happen if their dream would be, in conflict, where either of their dreams would be in conflict with the other. And now they get to, you know, kind of face it outright, because, you know, like, as couples do when they're faced with a problem, you know, ideally in a healthy way, you know. And right now they're also just kind of trying to enjoy the moment as well. The other reason why I did it this way, though, was also because, considering how much the timeline had diverged just by Ash and May getting together towards the end of the battle frontier, and how May had stayed with Ash instead of going back to Hoenn with Max. Or actually, no, she went to Johto. So she didn't leave with Max, she just went to Johto. Well, considering that she went with Ash instead of going to Johto, as in the original timeline, the timeline had already diverged a lot. So I figured, why should I be burdened with the anime's timeline if we're no longer on the timeline, you know what I mean? So yeah, the timeline basically branches. Like, well, it branched like right at the start of like May's crush anyway. Like all the way back in when PikamasterADV was writing the first one. Like, it already diverged at that point. It did merge a little bit with timeline afterward because, you know, the rest of the battle frontier did happen. Because, you know, afterward, Ash did fight Brandon. And, you know, all the all the possessing shenanigans that took place, you know, before then as well. Which I did allude to in this chapter, by the way. Don't know if y'all noticed. But besides that, it diverged again. Because of the choices they made. Ash no longer has his hat. May chose to go with Ash instead of going to Johto. And they went to the Sevii Islands instead of going to Sinnoh right away. And now, well, it's probably going to be a while before Ash even goes to Sinnoh. And I guess the third reason as well is that by the time I had written this chapter, it was 2018. No, it was 2019. So it was just before the pandemic. And at that point, I think we were in Gen 8 at that point? Yeah, we were at Gen 8 at that point. So, kind of crazy. You didn't realize I wrote this. Well, I wrote the denouement. PikamasterADV is the author who wrote the first Maze Crush story and most of Final Frontier. He left it unfinished though, so I took it upon myself to finish to finish the story, and I wrote, well, over 50,000 words worth of stuff, which is about half of what he had written for Final Frontier up to that point. So, like, I mean, I don't know what that says about me. I guess I just have a lot to say. And it's very cool that I read it out loud on stream. That's hard to do sometimes. It can be, yeah. But this was like one of those. I feel like this is one of those stories that I wrote after the point where I felt like I had a pretty good handle with my writing. Like I had a pretty good idea of like how my writing style works and all that. Now, I did make a lot of mistakes when writing this, of course. Only now do I realize that my showing instead of telling, especially in regards to like where dialogue was concerned, was just a little bit much. I did it to try to quicken up the pacing a little bit because I felt like it would be, I don't know, kind of redundant or repetitive to like have dialogue at specific points saying what it was that was going to be said already. I guess in a way I wanted to be like, I wanted to like mix up how I was presenting information, but in retrospect, I wasn't the best decision on my part. So I did go back and like expand on some things. So Aiden, that conversation that May had with Greta and Annabelle on the staircase earlier, that used to be shorter. Some of the conversation there was used to be more implied than outright stated. But then I remembered one of the reviews I got. I was like, wait a minute, yeah, you're right. This kind of stinks. So I kind of went back and changed it, and yeah. And same thing happened with the last chapter too, between May and Officer Jenny. Back when May was giving her impassioned defense for Team Rocket. Or for the Team Rocket trio. That too was a little bit more implied. Like it just kind of came and went without as much, you know, a whole lot of stuff. Because at that point, I just kind of wanted to be done with the story already. But now that I'm more removed from, like, having to write everything, since it is published and pretty much done, I could just go back and change some stuff. I still need to update the original, like, document on fanfic.net, but it was, this was a good opportunity for me to revisit my writing and try to make it better. So. Yeah, it is a good amount. 50,000 words, it's crazy. 6 chapters, so... I find that I write a lot when I do write something, but the stuff I write usually doesn't have a whole lot of chapters in it. I mean, in this case, it's justified because this was the end of the story. You know, and I basically just had to try to wrap up everything that PikamasterADV laid out before me. Which is harder than it seems because because he left a lot of loose ends not tied up, you know. Like, there was still the matter of, like, Brandon and all that, because, let me tell you, Brandon was difficult. He was so secretive throughout the story, so I had, like, very little idea of what his motivations were. Like, and he was, like, just tight-lipped about it, too. So, like, getting useful information out of that, absolutely, it took some thinking to do. And in fact, I was about to just kind of wash my hands of it, too. When, one of my reviewers, or one of my readers, left a review, saying that was probably one of the things that he didn't like about it, about how I was wrapping things up that he saw. So, like, he saw the conversation between May and Giovanni, and how Giovanni was basically disparaging him, saying like, "Oh well, he's just a greedy person who just cares about research, nothing more." And you know, my reader understandably got I don't want to say upset, but disappointed that that's the direction I was going in. So I was like, yeah, I agree with this take that he was kind of meant to be a double agent, but PikamasterADV there's so many contradictions there. Like, I had to find some way to reconcile his actions in being a double agent. Because yeah, he would want to, like, Because there was the fact that he tried to rescue them in the in the cave at Mount Ember. But he also kidnapped Ash? And then for matter tried to attack May in the Battle Fortress as well, which was actually something that I wrote, but I still had to find some way to get him to, like, still be a double agent. While also just kind of explaining, like, everything else. And I figured, okay, well, a hostage situation with a legendary Pokemon kind of worked out in the end. And why a Ho-Oh, you ask? Well, I mean, it was because of the dreams that May was having. I knew that I wanted to do something with the dream that she had of Ash, where he held up the Pokeball at her and said return, you know? I figured I wanted to do something with that. And, you know, the mind control devices and the Ho-Oh doing that. You know, the backstory with Brandon and all that. I feel like that kind of worked pretty well. So in the end, all's well that ends well. And now we are done with the story. Man. Man, it's bittersweet, you know? Finishing... It's like I finished 2 stories. Well, I guess 3, if you count the first one. Well, I mean... Because, you know, there was Maze Crush, and then Maze Crush Final Frontier, like all that PikamasterADV wrote. And then languished for 11 years before I took it upon myself to be like, okay, you know what? I'm finishing this myself. And then I did. And that was like 5 years ago when I finished. Little more than 5 years ago. So, like, in total, it's, like... Maze Crush Final Frontier is getting old enough... It's getting to the point where it can drive. If not vote. So... it's bittersweet. You know, this... story has had, like, a connection with me. You know, where it's like... I remember back in college. No, it wasn't college. It was like late high school when I got into I got into advanced shipping. You know, this is a story I've told before, but I won't go into too many more details there because I feel like I'm rambling a little bit. But like, I still remember that one time where I was like neck deep in fan fiction, and I was like, I feel like it was this story that I was reading. If not Final Frontier, then if not Maze Crush, then Final Frontier. Like, I remember my mom went to like a friend's house or something, and she took me with her, and I brought my laptop with me to like keep reading and all that. And I remember sitting, like, outside, just reading it. You know, just doing the reading, you know? It was a good time. It was a good time. And it's absolutely... You say, it's absolutely amazing, my guy. It's been an awesome story. Well, thank you, but also, I don't take all the credit for it because... Remember, PikamasterADV wrote the original story. He did write the vast majority of it, so credit where it's due. He is a major reason why the denouement was written at all. Mostly because he didn't actually write it himself, so I thought, okay, you know what, I'll just do it myself. But that's beside the point. It would be... I can't think of something more flattering than having a reader be such a fan of your work that they go out and write, like, a continuation of it. You know? So, like, I mean this in, like, the most, like, respectful, well, not respectful, because that sounds like I'm gonna be saying something mean, but, like, in the most flattering way possible. That his writing had an effect on me, you know? It drove me to write advanced shipping stories myself, and I mean, it culminated in me finishing one of his. Like, being able to inspire others with your writing is, I don't know. If I had that effect on someone, I would be just as flattered. So, but I mean, it is nice to be on the other side of that exchange, you know, where it's like, I'm the one who was inspired to do it, because inspiration in and of itself is also just a good motivator to do stuff, you know? Because it can be hard for me to find motivation to do stuff. And sometimes I'm just like, I just have the drive to do something that I'm like, okay, I have a one-track mind, I gotta do this, and, well, I did it! I mean, it took a while. It took, like, about a year. Almost a year for me to, like, finish the whole thing. But I still did it! Like, the drive didn't leave. And it's just crazy how other people can just give other people inspiration for that sort of thing, you know? So, yeah. But long story short, this is the end of the Maze Crush saga. I hope you all had a great time going through this journey. By which I mean you, especially Aiden, because I know you were here throughout this whole journey. And yeah, it's crazy, actually. Just can't believe that that we're done with it. Like I said, it's bittersweet, but it's also like exciting too, because now I can think about what I'm gonna do next for Storytime, for Mochi Storytime. And I know one of the thoughts that I had was also potentially writing an epilogue to the story. That is something that I floated in the air, you know? And I have expressed my regret with not giving Cindy as much screen time in the denouement as I wanted, but perhaps I could remedy that. She could be the star of the epilogue, or like maybe a sequel story or something. I don't know. It's gonna take a lot of mental energy for me to do, so I would not expect it anytime soon, but it is something that I can toy around with a little bit. But in the more immediate future, there are other stories that I want to get to. One, in fact, is another advanced shipping story, but it is one that I have not read in a long time. And it's also one that I don't even have a soundtrack for yet, so getting that prepared, that's gonna take a long time, probably. Because that is also an epic. I also will want to try to reach out to the original author as well to get permission to read it. Assuming, you know, they're still around, of course. It's really hard to say because this was also written, like, well over a decade ago. So who knows if they're still around. But I gotta at least try. Until I get to that part, though, there is another shipping fic that I want to read that's more on the humor side of things. And it's not advanced shipping.
It's transceiver shipping. For Pokemon, you know, it's another Pokemon shipping fic. Transceiver shipping. Which is the shipping between Nate and Yancey. I did find a pretty hilarious story involving that pairing that I would like to read out to all of you. And I did get permission from the original author to do it. So, I think for the next time in Mochi Storytime, we will be reading that one. And I should probably also reach out to the original author again, because they did say that they are still interested in trying to finish it. They just haven't really gotten around to it. So maybe if I say, hey, I'm gonna start reading it now on such and such, you know, at such and such URL on such and such days, maybe they can get it in before I get to the end, because it is technically an unfinished story as well. But it's not abandoned, or at least that's the impression that I got from the conversation with them. So, and besides that, there are a couple of Zelda fanfics that I've written myself, actually, and also other Zelda fanfics that I do want to read too, and one that I really need to ping the original author on again, because I have a sneaking suspicion that the original story is still delisted, and I really want to read that one. That one story that I have in mind especially was the major inspiration for Mochi Storytime in the first place. So I really cannot wait to read that one. But I also want to make sure that I follow the author's wishes and not do it until it is ready to do. So I am doing this, doing other stories in the meantime. But alright, so now that we have the future itinerary out of the way, I think it is time to end stream here. Thank you, everyone, for watching here. This was great. A lot of fun. I have a newfound appreciation for the story. Despite all, you know, the rough mistakes that, looking back on it, were actually really hard for me to read through at first. It's still a grand old time. And it's even better when there are people here to also, you know, be here to witness it. So, what do we do now? Well, I do not actually know anyone who is streaming at the moment, personally. But hey, speaking of Zelda, there is apparently, it looks like a collaborative art stream going on, where someone is actually drawing, or like doing a Skyward Sword piece of fan art. Which, by the way, Skyward Sword is the Zelda game of that the fic that I talked about just now that inspired Mochi Storytime is based on. It is a Skyward Sword fic. So, you know what? I'd say the stars are aligned. From one type of art to another, let's go raid them. Thank you for watching, everybody. Now I will talk to you next time for Mochi Storytime. Whenever that is. We shall see. Splatoon will make it a little bit difficult, because, you know, we do have Ludi, and there's also the fact that I want to beat Xenoblade 3 Future Redeemed before Xenoblade Chronicles X comes out. I don't know how realistic that will be, but I'm gonna have to try to, you know, fill that in somehow. You know? We'll have to find a way to do that somehow, but until then, thank you for watching. I'll see y'all next time. Take care, y'all.